The gunshot that shattered Pine Hollow's spring morning wasn't meant for Ethan Cole, but the bullet that followed was. Standing between a drunk land baron and a schoolteacher he'd never met, the cattleman who'd sworn never to get involved broke every rule he'd lived by for the past decade. One intervention, one moment of choosing right over safe, and suddenly, the man who planned to ride out by dawn found himself staring down 3 loaded barrels, protecting a woman whose name he didn't even know yet. A woman whose pride and debt would cost him everything he'd built in solitude. Welcome to a story of unexpected courage and impossible choices on the American frontier. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if this tale moves you, don't forget to hit that like button. Now, let's ride into Pine Hollow together. The spring of 1875 came to Wyoming territory with mud and promise in equal measure. Snow melted off the Bighorn Mountains in silver ribbons, swelling every creek and river until the prairie wore a green so bright it hurt the eyes. Wildflowers pushed through winter-hardened ground, lupine and Indian paintbrush claiming the hillsides like scattered jewels. The air smelled of sage and possibility, that particular freshness that made even hard men pause and remember there might be something good left in the world. Ethan Cole noticed none of it. He sat his buckskin gelding at the crest of the final ridge overlooking Pine Hollow, his eyes tracking not the beauty of spring, but the practical layout of the settlement below. One main street, maybe 40 buildings total. General store on the north end, saloon on the south. Church steeple rising white against blue sky. The scatter of homes spreading outward like seeds thrown carelessly on fertile ground. Small enough to get supplies without drawing attention. Large enough to have what he needed. Perfect for a man who intended to be gone before anyone learned his name. Ethan touched his heels to Buck's flanks, and the horse picked his way down the muddy slope with the careful precision of an animal who'd carried his rider through worse terrain than this. They'd been together 6 years now, horse and man, moving through the territories with no destination and less conversation. That suited Ethan fine. The war had taught him that words were just another thing men used to hurt each other, and the decades since Appomattox had only confirmed that bitter lesson. He wore his isolation like the duster that covered his shoulders, practical, protective, chosen. At 34, he'd survived battles that killed better men, outlasted winters that froze livestock where they stood, and built a life on a remote patch of grassland where his nearest neighbor was a 3-day ride away. He raised cattle because cattle didn't ask questions. He lived alone because alone was safer. And he came to towns like Pine Hollow only when absolute necessity demanded it. The buckskin's hooves made sucking sounds in the mud as they entered the settlement proper. It was mid-morning on what looked to be a Tuesday, and Pine Hollow was doing that slow dance of a frontier town trying to become something more than a collection of buildings. A woman swept the boardwalk in front of a dressmaker's shop. 2 men argued about lumber prices outside what appeared to be a mill. A dog slept in the street, unbothered by the occasional wagon that rumbled past. Ethan guided Buck toward the general store, his eyes cataloging details with the automatic wariness of a man who'd learned that survival meant paying attention. The store looked well-stocked based on the goods visible through the front window. Good. He could get flour, coffee, ammunition, maybe some tobacco if they had decent stock. Be back on the trail by afternoon, back to his ranch in 4 days if the weather held. Simple. Quick. Anonymous. He was tying Buck's reins to the hitching post when he heard the first raised voice. "I said I'll pay when I can, Mr. Garrett." The woman's voice carried that particular edge of someone trying to maintain dignity while anger burned underneath. "You know my situation." "Your situation ain't my concern, Miss Moore." This voice was male, thick with drink despite the early hour, carrying the blunt force of a man used to getting his way. "Your daddy died owing half the town. That makes it your problem now." Ethan's hands stilled on the reins. "Not my business," he reminded himself. "Whatever's happening in there, it's between them." He'd taken 2 steps toward the store's entrance when the sound of breaking glass stopped him cold. "You touch me again and I'll—" "You'll what?" The man's laugh was ugly. "You'll have your daddy come defend your honor? He's been dead 6 months, sweetheart. Time you learned how the world works for women without protection." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Walk away. Get your supplies and get out. This town has law, has men who live here and should handle this. His boots stayed rooted to the boardwalk. Through the store's front window, he could see them now. A woman in a plain gray dress, her dark hair pulled back severe, facing down a man who had 6 inches and 80 pounds on her. The man wore expensive clothes gone rumpled with drink, his face flushed red with whiskey and entitlement. He had her backed against the counter, one meaty hand gripping her arm hard enough that even from outside Ethan could see her wince. 2 other men stood near the door laughing, enjoying the show. The storekeeper, older man, bald, wearing an apron, hovered nearby with the helpless expression of someone who wanted to intervene but lacked the courage. Or maybe the power. In a frontier town, power usually belonged to whoever had the most land, the most money, the most men willing to do their dirty work. The drunk in expensive clothes had that look about him. Ethan had seen this scene before. Different town, different faces, same ugly story. The war had been full of moments like this, powerful men taking what they wanted from those who couldn't fight back. He told himself then that he was just following orders, that it wasn't his place to interfere, that survival meant keeping your head down and your conscience quiet. He'd been living with that choice for 10 years. His hand was on the door before he'd consciously decided to move. The bell above the entrance chimed cheerfully as Ethan stepped inside. The drunk's head swiveled toward the sound, his grip still tight on the woman's arm. Up close, he was maybe 40, running to fat, but still solid underneath. His eyes held the dangerous combination of wealth and alcohol and the absolute certainty that consequences didn't apply to him. "Store's closed," the drunk announced, his words slurring just enough to confirm Ethan's assessment. "Come back later." "Looks open to me." Ethan kept his voice level, his hands loose at his sides. The woman's eyes met his for just a second, dark brown, full of anger and something harder to name. Pride, maybe. Or the kind of desperation that came from having no good choices left. The drunk straightened, releasing the woman's arm. "You deaf stranger, I said closed." "And I said it looks open." Ethan turned to the storekeeper, deliberately putting his back to the drunk, an insult in the unspoken language of frontier masculinity. "Need to get some supplies, flour, coffee, ammunition if you've got 4440 in stock." "Now listen here." The drunk started forward, but one of his companions caught his arm. "That's just Garrett being drunk again, mister," the second man said, his tone falsely jovial. "No need for strangers to get involved in local business." "Seems to me the local business is running a store." Ethan met the man's eyes directly. "I got money to spend. You telling me Pine Hollow's the kind of town that turns away paying customers?" The woman had moved away from the counter, putting distance between herself and her tormentor. Ethan caught the faint tremor in her hands before she clasped them together, forcing them still. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe late 20s, with a face that might have been pretty if it wasn't currently tight with suppressed emotion. Anger, fear, humiliation. The drunk, Garrett, swayed slightly, his bloodshot eyes trying to focus on Ethan's face. "You know who I am, stranger?" "Nope." Ethan turned back to the storekeeper. "That flour fresh, or you selling last year's stock?" "I own half this valley." Garrett's voice rose. "I got 12 men working for me. I say who does business in this town." "That's so." Ethan examined a can of peaches on the nearest shelf with elaborate disinterest. "You also say who gets to manhandle women in broad daylight? That one of your privileges?" The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Garrett's face went from flush to deep red. "What did you say to me?" "I'm just trying to understand the local customs." Ethan set the can down carefully, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "See, where I come from, a man who puts hands on a woman like that generally gets himself taught better manners, but maybe things work different in Pine Hollow." The 2 companions shifted position, spreading out slightly. Flanking. Ethan noted it without changing his relaxed stance. 3 against 1 were poor odds, but not impossible. He'd faced worse. The woman spoke up, her voice steady despite the tension crackling through the air like static before a lightning strike. "This doesn't concern you, sir. I can handle Mr. Garrett myself." Didn't look that way from outside. Ethan finally let his gaze rest fully on Garrett. "Looked like you needed to break glass just to get him to step back." "The bitch cut her hand on purpose," Garrett snarled. Trying to make me look bad. Ethan glanced at the woman's right hand. Blood welled from a cut across her palm, bright red against pale skin. She'd wrapped it in a handkerchief, but the cloth was already soaked through. Doesn't seem like you need much help looking bad, Ethan observed mildly. One of the companions laughed before catching himself. Garrett's head snapped toward him, and the man's grin vanished like water on hot stone. You think you're funny, stranger? Garrett took a step closer, and Ethan caught the full wave of whiskey-sour breath. You think you can ride into my town and insult me in front of my men? Wasn't trying to be funny. Ethan's voice stayed level, almost conversational. As far as I can see, this is public property. Store's open to anyone with coin. I got needs. That's the extent of my interest in your business. Unless you make it my business by continuing to bother that lady while I'm trying to conduct mine. The silence stretched taut as wire. Then Garrett smiled, and it was the ugliest thing Ethan had seen in a month of Sundays. You got no idea what you just stepped into, stranger. Probably not, Ethan agreed. But I know what I'm stepping out of if you'll get out of my way so I can buy supplies and leave your town in peace. For a moment it hung in the balance. Ethan could see Garrett calculating, drunk, but not so far gone, he couldn't recognize real danger when it stood in front of him. Whatever Garrett saw in Ethan's face made him reconsider the direct approach. We'll finish our conversation later, Miss Moore, Garrett said, his eyes never leaving Ethan's. You can count on that. He shouldered past Ethan hard enough to make it clear the contact was deliberate, his two companions following like dogs at heel. The bell above the door chimed their departure, cheerful and oblivious to the tension they left behind. The storekeeper let out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it for hours. Mister, you just made yourself an enemy. Wasn't trying to make anything except a purchase. Ethan turned back to the counter. About that flour. Thank you. The woman's voice cut through his words, quiet but firm. That was, you didn't have to do that. Ethan shrugged. Didn't do much. Just asked to buy supplies. You know that's not what you did. She moved closer, still cradling her injured hand. Up close, he could see the fine lines around her eyes, worry lines, the kind that came from carrying weight too heavy for one person. You stood between me and Samuel Garrett. In this town, that's the same as declaring war. Then this town's got problems. Ethan met her eyes directly for the first time. Brown, he'd noted before, but he hadn't caught the gold flecks that caught the light from the window. Hadn't seen the steel underneath the fear. He always handle business that way? Only with people who can't fight back. Her smile was bitter. I'm Lydia Moore, by the way. Since you've apparently just risked your life for me, seems like you should know my name. Ethan Cole. He touched the brim of his hat, automatic courtesy from a lifetime ago. And I didn't risk anything. Man was drunk. Probably won't even remember this come nightfall. The storekeeper, whose name turned out to be Henderson, made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. You don't know Samuel Garrett, Mr. Cole. He remembers every slight, real or imagined. And he never forgets a face. Good thing I'm leaving today, then. Ethan pulled a list from his pocket, worn paper with his cramped handwriting listing necessities. How fast can you fill this order? Henderson took the list, scanning it with the practiced eye of a man who'd been outfitting frontiersmen for decades. 2 hours, maybe 3. Got most of this in stock, but I'll need to portion out the flour and coffee, pack it proper for travel. 3 hours. Longer than Ethan wanted to stay, but still manageable. He could wait out back, keep to himself, avoid any further contact with Garrett or his men. Be on the trail by early afternoon. I'll pay half now, half when I pick it up. Ethan counted out coins from his leather purse, the clink of gold drawing Henderson's appreciative eye. You want I should have it ready for... The door crashed open hard enough to rattle the windows. Samuel Garrett stood framed in the doorway, but he wasn't drunk anymore. Something in the past few minutes had burned the alcohol right out of him, leaving behind cold calculation and colder fury. Behind him, his two companions had been joined by 4 more men, all wearing gun belts, all wearing the same expression of men being paid to cause trouble. Thought about what you said, stranger? Garrett's voice was steady now, almost pleasant. About how things work where you come from. Got me thinking maybe I should teach you how things work in Pine Hollow. Ethan's hand stilled on the coins. He didn't reach for his gun, not yet, but every muscle in his body prepared for the possibility. Already told you, I'm just here for supplies, no interest in local politics. Too late for that. Garrett smiled, all teeth and malice. You involved yourself the minute you opened your mouth. Now you're going to learn why folks in this valley do what I say. The 6 men spread out, blocking the exit. Henderson had gone pale, backing away toward the storeroom. Smart man, recognizing when business became violence. Lydia Moore hadn't moved. She stood by the counter, her injured hand pressed against her skirt, watching the tableau with those steady brown eyes. No screaming, no pleading, just watching, like she was memorizing details for a report she'd have to make later. Let me make this simple, Garrett continued, moving deeper into the store. You're going to apologize to me. Then you're going to apologize to Miss Moore for interfering in matters that don't concern you. Then you're going to get on that horse of yours and ride out, and we'll forget this unfortunate incident ever happened. And if I don't? Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. Garrett's smile widened. Then my boys are going to teach you some manners the hard way. And trust me, stranger, they're real good at teaching. Ethan looked at the 6 men blocking his path. Young, mostly, probably not much past 20. Trying to look hard and mostly succeeding, the way men do when they're backed by numbers and someone else's authority. 2 of them had their hands hovering near their guns. Not quite threatening, not quite innocent. Poor odds. Bad positioning. No good options. Just like the war. Just like everything since. Here's my counteroffer, Ethan said quietly. You and your boys step aside. Let me conduct my business in peace, and we'll all go our separate ways with no blood spilled on Henderson's floor. One of the younger men laughed. You think you can take all 6 of us, old man? Don't want to take anyone. Ethan's voice stayed calm, conversational. But I will if you make it necessary. Garrett's eyes narrowed, reassessing. Whatever he saw in Ethan's face made his smile falter just slightly. You were military. A long time ago. I can see it. The way you stand. The way you don't scare. Garrett tilted his head, curious now instead of just angry. What'd you do in the war? Things I'm not proud of, Ethan answered honestly. Same as most men who wore a uniform. And you think that training makes you dangerous enough to face 6 armed men? I think I don't want to find out. Ethan's hand drifted closer to his gun, casual, like scratching an itch, but the meaning was clear. But I also think you don't want to find out how many of your boys I take with me before I go down. Might be all of them. Might be just 2 or 3. You willing to make that trade, Mr. Garrett? My life for 2 or 3 of theirs? The silence stretched like taffy. Then Lydia Moore spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife through silk. Samuel, this is ridiculous. You're going to start a gunfight in Henderson's store because a stranger asked to buy flour? Shut up, Lydia. Garrett didn't look at her. This doesn't concern you anymore. It absolutely concerns me. You started this because of me. I started this because some saddle tramp thought he could disrespect me. No. Lydia moved forward, positioning herself deliberately between Ethan and Garrett's men. You started this because you were drunk and inappropriate, and this man called you on it. Now you're going to compound your embarrassment by starting violence in a place of business, in front of witnesses? One of Garrett's companions shifted uncomfortably. Boss, maybe she's got a... I said shut up! Garrett's voice cracked like a whip, but Ethan saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the calculation. Lydia had given him an out, a way to back down without losing too much face. Would he be smart enough to take it? This ain't over, Garrett said finally, his eyes still locked on Ethan. You understand me, stranger? This ain't even close to over. Didn't figure it was, Ethan agreed. You stay in Pine Hollow, you stay on my sufferance, my permission, and that permission can be withdrawn any time I see fit. Appreciate the warning. Garrett stared at him a moment longer, then jerked his head at his men. Let's go. I got better things to do than waste time on drifters. They filed out, boots heavy on the wooden floor. The bell chimed merrily. Through the window, Ethan watched them mount up and ride toward the south end of town, toward what was probably Garrett's ranch or headquarters, or wherever men like him held court. Henderson emerged from the storeroom, shaking his head. That was the damnedest thing I've seen in 20 years of storekeeping. Which part? Lydia's voice was dry. The part where Samuel Garrett got called out for bad behavior, or the part where someone actually stood up to him? The part where everyone walked away alive. Henderson started gathering items from Ethan's list. Though I suspect that's temporary. Very temporary, Lydia agreed. She turned to Ethan, studying him with open curiosity. Why did you do that? You don't know me. Don't know this town. You could have just walked away. Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. Seemed like the right thing to do at the time. The right thing usually gets people killed in Pine Hollow. So I'm learning. She smiled then, small and sad. You should still leave. Today, like you planned. Samuel will be back with more men, and next time he won't give you a chance to talk your way out. Probably right. Ethan glanced at Henderson. How long for those supplies? Could be ready in an hour if I push. Push then. I'll wait outside. He started toward the door, but Lydia's voice stopped him. Mr. Cole, thank you. Not just for intervening, but for... She hesitated, searching for words. For treating me like I had a right to conduct business without being accosted. You'd be surprised how rare that is. Ethan touched his hat brim again, that old automatic gesture. Anyone gives you trouble, you should talk to the sheriff. Her laugh was short and bitter. The sheriff works for Samuel Garrett, same as the judge, the mayor, and half the merchants on this street. My father used to be the exception, the one man Garrett couldn't buy or intimidate. But my father's dead, and his debts fell to me, and now... She spread her hands, encompassing the whole sorry situation. Now I'm just another problem Garrett intends to solve. What kind of debts? The kind that come from running a school that doesn't charge tuition and a household that never turned away anyone who needed help. Lydia's voice softened. My father believed education should be free, believed helping your neighbors was more important than profits. Noble ideals that left me with a mortgage I can't pay and creditors who'd rather sell the property to Garrett than extend credit to a woman on her own. How much you owe? Mr. Cole, I didn't tell you that story looking for charity. Didn't figure you did. I'm just asking. She studied his face for a long moment. $1,500. Might as well be $15,000 for all the chance I have of raising it. Ethan did the math silently. It was a substantial sum, but not impossible. Not for a man who'd spent 10 years living cheap and saving every extra dollar against some unnamed future need. Not for a man who had a strongbox buried under the floorboards of his cabin containing the accumulated wages of a decade's hard work. Not that it was his problem, not that he should even be considering it. When's it due? He heard himself ask. End of May, 6 weeks from now. Lydia frowned at him. Why? Good question. Why was he asking? Why was he still standing here instead of outside, waiting for his supplies and planning his route home? Because that look in her eyes reminded him of something he'd thought he'd forgotten. Pride and desperation in equal measure. The look of someone who'd been backed into a corner by forces beyond their control, same as all those people he hadn't helped during the war. All those moments when he'd walked away because getting involved was too dangerous, too complicated, too likely to end badly. He'd been walking away for 10 years. Maybe he was tired of it. Just curious, Ethan said finally. I'll be outside if Henderson needs anything. He stepped onto the boardwalk, moving away from questions he didn't want to answer and impulses he didn't trust. The sun had climbed higher, burning off the morning coolness and leaving behind the kind of warmth that promised real heat by afternoon. Buck dozed at the hitching post, one hip cocked, completely at ease despite the drama that had just unfolded. Ethan envied him that peace. That was either very brave or very stupid. A new voice, male, coming from Ethan's left. He turned to find a man leaning against the wall of the general store, mid-50s maybe, wearing a worn suit and a badge that caught the sunlight. Sheriff, then. Or what passed for one in a town owned by men like Garrett. Probably stupid, Ethan agreed. Seems to be my specialty lately. The sheriff pushed off the wall, moving with the careful economy of someone nursing old injuries. Name's Tom Bradshaw. I'm what passes for law in Pine Hollow, for whatever that's worth. Ethan Cole. They shook hands, and Ethan noted the firm grip, the calluses that spoke of work beyond pushing papers. Whatever else Bradshaw might be, He wasn't entirely Garrett's puppet. "You should leave," Bradshaw said quietly. "Soon as Henderson gets your supplies together. Don't even stay for lunch." "That's the plan." "Good." Bradshaw glanced toward the south end of town where Garrett and his men had disappeared. "Because if you stay, there's going to be trouble. And trouble in Pine Hollow has a way of ending with bodies in the street and me writing reports nobody wants to read." "You're the sheriff. Can't you control Garrett?" Bradshaw's laugh was tired. "Son, I can't even control my own deputies, seeing as how Garrett pays their salaries. I wear this badge because somebody has to, and I like to think I do some good around the edges, but going up against Samuel Garrett?" He shook his head. "That's a young man's game, and I stopped being young about 2 wars ago." "What about Lydia Moore? She got any protection if Garrett decides to push?" "Only what little I can offer, which isn't much." Bradshaw studied Ethan's face. "You thinking about staying?" "No." "Then why ask?" "Good question." Ethan didn't have a good answer. "Garrett really own half the valley?" he asked instead. "Close enough. Bought up land when the drought hit 5 years back. Folks sold cheap just to get out, and Garrett was there with cash in hand. Now he owns maybe 60% of the productive grazing land within 3 days' ride, controls who gets water access, who can drive cattle to market, who gets to keep their ranch, and who gets squeezed out." Bradshaw pulled out a cigarette, offered one to Ethan, who declined. "He's not the worst I've seen. Doesn't kill for fun. Pays his men fair. But he's got that peculiar blindness rich men get. Thinks the rules that apply to regular folks don't apply to him." "And Lydia Moore's father?" "Marcus Moore was a teacher before he came west. Opened a school, taught kids who couldn't afford fancy boarding schools back east, made enemies because he taught Mexican kids alongside white kids, girls alongside boys. Garrett tolerated him because Marcus was useful, educated Garrett's own daughter, tutored the children of Garrett's business partners. But Marcus had expensive principles, never charged tuition, never turned away anyone who needed help." Bradshaw exhaled smoke. "Died last fall." Asked. Heart gave out. Left Lydia with a house full of debts and a town full of students who can't pay her any more than they could pay her father. "Garrett holding the mortgage?" "Not directly, but the bank that holds it is owned by Garrett's cousin. Same difference." Ethan watched a wagon roll past, driven by a farmer who kept his eyes carefully forward, not looking at the stranger talking to the sheriff. Staying uninvolved, staying safe. Smart man. "I should check on my supplies," Ethan said. Bradshaw nodded. "You do that, and Mr. Cole, whatever you're thinking about doing, don't. This isn't your fight, and getting involved will only end one way." "And how's that?" "With you buried in the cemetery next to men who also thought they could stand up to Samuel Garrett." Ethan left him smoking on the boardwalk. Inside the store, Henderson had assembled most of the supplies: flour sacks, coffee tins, ammunition boxes stacked neatly on the counter. Lydia was gone, probably back to her school or home, or wherever she spent her days trying to hold together a life that was slowly slipping through her fingers. "Not your problem," Ethan reminded himself. "You came for supplies. Get them and go." But his hands were steady as he counted out the rest of the payment, and his voice was calm when he asked Henderson, "The Moore place. Where is it?" Henderson's eyes went sharp. "Why?" "Just curious. Curiosity's gotten more men killed than greed in this territory." But Henderson jerked his head toward the north. "White House on the edge of town. Can't miss it. Only building up that way with a schoolhouse attached. Why?" "No reason?" Ethan loaded his supplies onto Buck, working with the automatic efficiency of a man who'd packed and repacked gear more times than he could count. The horse accepted the burden with patient familiarity, swishing his tail at flies and otherwise unbothered by the weight. "Mount up. Ride north to avoid Garrett's men. Follow the creek back toward his ranch. 4 days of hard riding, and he'd be home, back to his cattle and his solitude and his carefully constructed life that required nothing from anyone." That was the plan. That was what made sense. Ethan swung into the saddle, gathered the reins, and turned Buck north toward the White House, with the schoolhouse attached. The Moore property sat on a gentle rise, surrounded by cottonwoods just starting to leaf out in that particular bright green of early spring. The house was bigger than Ethan expected, 2 stories, well-maintained despite obvious age, with a wide porch and flower boxes that showed someone's care. The schoolhouse was a separate building, connected to the main house by a covered walkway, its windows tall and generous with light. Beautiful property. Worth far more than $1,500 if someone wanted to develop it, which Ethan suspected was exactly why Garrett wanted it. He dismounted, tied Buck to the porch rail, and stood there like an idiot trying to figure out what he was doing and why he was doing it. He'd come to Pine Hollow for flour and coffee. He was leaving with what? Intentions he couldn't name and motivations he didn't understand? The front door opened before he could decide whether to knock or run. Lydia Moore stood in the doorway, her injured hand now properly bandaged, her expression equal parts surprise and wariness. "Mr. Cole, I didn't expect to see you again." "Didn't expect to be here," Ethan admitted. "Yet here you are." "Here I am." They stared at each other across the porch, and Ethan felt the absurdity of the moment settle over him like a blanket. What was he doing? What did he think was going to happen? "Would you like to come in?" Lydia asked finally. "I just made coffee, and you look like a man who could use a cup." He should say no. Should tip his hat, turn around, and ride north while he still had good sense left. "Coffee would be good," Ethan heard himself say. The interior of the house matched the exterior. Well kept, comfortable, showing signs of a life lived with care and modest means. Books lined every available wall space. A piano stood in the corner, sheet music scattered across its top. Photographs in simple frames showed a tall man with Lydia's eyes standing beside children of various ages, all looking serious the way people did when facing a camera. Lydia led him to the kitchen, poured coffee into plain ceramic cups, and gestured toward a table that had probably hosted 1,000 meals and conversations. They sat across from each other, steam rising between them, neither quite sure how to begin. "Why did you come here today?" Lydia asked finally. "Honestly? I'm not entirely sure." "That's not very reassuring." "Didn't figure it would be." Ethan wrapped his hands around the cup, letting the heat ground him. "Sheriff says Garrett controls most of the valley. Says you don't have much chance of keeping this place." Sheriff Bradshaw is probably right. Lydia's voice was matter of fact, accepting reality without surrendering to it. "But I'm not giving up without exhausting every option." "What options you got left?" She smiled, sad and knowing. "Fewer than I'd like. More than none. I've written to schools back east asking if they need teachers, talked to families about taking in boarders, even considered selling the piano, though that would break my heart. Wouldn't raise enough anyway. No, but it would buy time. And time is all I need to figure out something better." Ethan studied her across the table. She had the look of someone who'd been fighting so long she'd forgotten what surrender felt like. The kind of exhausted determination that came from having no choice except to keep moving forward, because stopping meant losing everything. He knew that look, had seen it in the mirror often enough during the war years and after. "What if you had the money?" he asked. "All of it, paid in full. What would you do then?" Lydia's eyes narrowed. "That's a strange question from a stranger. Everything about today's been strange. Might as well keep going. If I had the money." She trailed off, staring into her coffee like it held answers. "I'd keep teaching, keep the school open. My father believed every child deserved education regardless of their family's ability to pay. And I believe it too. More than that, I think I'm good at it. I think I make a difference." "I'm sure you do." "You don't know anything about me, Mr. Cole. I know you stood up to a drunk bully twice your size. Know you wrapped your own injured hand rather than ask for help. Know you've got a house full of books and a schoolhouse full of desks, and determination enough to keep fighting when most folks would have quit." Ethan met her eyes directly. "That tells me plenty." Silence stretched between them again, but different this time. Not awkward so much as weighted with possibility. "Why are you really here?" Lydia asked again, quieter. Ethan set down his cup, the ceramic clicking against wood. "I've been running my own ranch for 6 years, built it from nothing. Don't owe anybody, don't need anybody, and that suited me fine. But today, watching Garrett push you around, watching you fight back..." He paused, searching for words that felt true. Made me remember there's reasons besides survival to get involved in other people's business. That's a lovely sentiment, Mr. Cole, but sentiment doesn't pay debts. No, money pays debts. Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed immediately by something harder: suspicion. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm thinking out loud, trying to figure out if there's a way to help that doesn't make things worse. You can't pay my debts. Her voice was flat. I won't accept charity from a stranger. Didn't offer charity. Then what are you offering? Good question. What was he offering, and why? Because he'd intervened in one altercation? Because she had proud eyes and a righteous cause? Because somewhere in the past 10 years of isolation, he'd lost sight of what it meant to be part of something bigger than his own survival? I don't know yet, Ethan admitted, but I know I'm not leaving Pine Hollow today, and I know Garrett's going to come for you again, probably sooner than later, so maybe... He stopped, hearing how ridiculous this was going to sound. Maybe I stay, just for a few days. Make sure he doesn't push you again. You want to protect me. Want's a strong word. But yeah, basically. Why would you do that? Because I can. Because it's right. Because I'm tired of walking away from things that matter. Lydia stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked her father's school. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of careful consideration. If you stay in Pine Hollow, Samuel Garrett will see it as a challenge. He'll bring more men. He'll escalate. People could get hurt. People are already getting hurt. You, for instance. I can handle Samuel. Didn't look that way this morning? She turned, anger flashing in her eyes. I've been handling Samuel Garrett and men like him my entire life, Mr. Cole. I don't need rescue. Didn't say you did. Then what do you call this? Riding up to my house, offering to, what, stand guard? Fight my battles? I call it offering help to someone who might need it, whether they want to admit it or not. They stared at each other across the kitchen, tension crackling between them like summer heat lightning. Ethan saw the moment Lydia's anger shifted to something more complicated, recognition maybe, of a kindred spirit who understood pride and stubbornness in equal measure. If you stay, she said slowly, you stay on my terms. You don't pay my debts. You don't fight my battles unless I explicitly ask, and you leave the minute I tell you to. Agreed? It was a terrible agreement. Left him with all the risk and none of the authority to act. Guaranteed he'd be standing on the sidelines while Garrett made his next move. Agreed, Ethan said. Lydia's eyebrows rose. Just like that? Just like that. You're either very trusting or very stupid, Mr. Cole. Probably both. Ethan stood, feeling the ache of hours in the saddle settle into his back. Where's the nearest boarding house? Mrs. Chen's place, 2 streets over, but... Lydia hesitated. The schoolhouse has a room I use for storage. It's not much, but there's a cot and a stove. If you're determined to stay, you might as well stay close. That would put you at risk. I'm already at risk. Having someone nearby who can shoot straight might actually improve my odds. It was madness. Pure foolishness. Staying in a town where he'd already made an enemy of the most powerful man in the valley, protecting a woman he'd known for all of 3 hours, sleeping in a storage room attached to a schoolhouse that would likely become a target the moment Garrett learned he was still here. Complete madness. Show me the room, Ethan said. The storage space was exactly what Lydia promised, small, dusty, containing a narrow cot and a potbelly stove that looked like it hadn't been used in years. But it had 4 walls and a door that locked, and the window faced the main house, which meant he'd see anyone approaching. Good enough. Ethan unsaddled Buck, rubbed him down, and settled him in the small stable behind the house. Carried his supplies into the storage room, tested the cot. It groaned, but held. Checked his rifle, his pistol, counted ammunition. Preparing for a siege he wasn't sure was coming but suspected would arrive sooner than later. Through the window, he watched Lydia move through her evening routine, lighting lamps, pulling curtains, tidying the schoolroom for tomorrow's students. She moved with unconscious grace, comfortable in her space, unaware or uncaring of his observation. "What have you gotten yourself into?" Ethan asked himself. No good answer came. The sun set in shades of gold and crimson, painting the Bighorn Mountains in fire. Night settled over Pine Hollow like a blanket, bringing with it the sounds of a frontier town winding down, dogs barking, voices calling goodnight, the distant music from the saloon on the south end of town where Garrett and his men likely held court. Ethan lay on the narrow cot, still fully dressed, his gun belt within easy reach. Sleep wouldn't come easy tonight, and he didn't try to force it. Just stared at the ceiling, listening to the night sounds, waiting for trouble he knew was on its way. Through the thin walls, he heard Lydia moving in the main house, heard her footsteps on the stairs, heard the creak of floorboards overhead as she prepared for bed. A stranger in her house, a man she'd known for hours, trusting him with her safety and her life based on nothing more than one moment of intervention. Either she was desperate or she was a better judge of character than he'd given her credit for. Possibly both. Somewhere past midnight, Buck nickered softly in the stable. Alert, but not alarmed. Ethan rose silently, moved to the window, scanned the darkness. Nothing. Just shadows and starlight and the whisper of wind through cottonwood branches. But his hand stayed on his pistol grip until the horse settled. Tomorrow would bring questions, confrontation, choices that would determine whether he'd made the right decision staying or had just condemned himself to a fight he couldn't win. But tonight, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan Cole felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Even if where he needed to be was a storage room in a schoolhouse, protecting a woman he barely knew from a threat that was absolutely, definitely coming. The night deepened around him, and Ethan waited for dawn. Dawn arrived with the kind of clarity that only spring mornings in Wyoming territory could provide. Air so crisp it burned the lungs, light so pure it made every blade of grass stand out in sharp relief against the dark earth. Ethan had been awake for hours, watching through the window as the world shifted from black to gray to gold, tracking the movements of early risers heading toward their day's work. No sign of Garrett's men. Yet. He heard Lydia stirring in the main house around 5:30, the creak of floorboards overhead followed by the sound of water being pumped, the clatter of a stove being stoked to life. Ordinary domestic sounds that felt strangely intimate in the quiet morning. He was pulling on his boots when a knock came at the storage room door. "Mr. Cole? I've made coffee if you'd like some before the students arrive." Students. Right, because this was a school, and Lydia was a teacher, and life continued even when men with guns were planning violence. The normalcy of it struck Ethan as almost absurd. He opened the door to find her already dressed for the day, in a serviceable blue calico dress, her hair pinned back severe, that bandaged hand tucked against her side. She looked tired. Shadows under her eyes suggested she'd slept about as well as he had, but determined. Always that steel underneath. "Coffee would be good," he said. They walked to the main house together, neither speaking, the morning too new and too fragile for conversation. Inside, the kitchen smelled of fresh bread and strong coffee, homey scents that reminded Ethan of a life he'd left behind so long ago he sometimes forgot it had ever existed. Lydia poured 2 cups, set one in front of him, and settled into the chair across the table with the ease of repeated habit. For a moment, they just sat there, 2 strangers sharing morning silence like old companions. "How many students you expecting today?" Ethan asked finally. 12, usually. Sometimes 15 if the weather's good and families can spare the children from chores. She sipped her coffee, watching him over the rim. They range from 6 to 14 years old. Mixed backgrounds, ranchers' kids, merchants' children, a few from the Mexican families south of town. My father never turned anyone away based on ability to pay or color of skin, and neither will I. Garrett object to that? Constantly. He believes education should be reserved for those who can afford it and look like him. Her voice carried that particular bitterness reserved for long-standing grievances. But he never pushed too hard while my father was alive. Marcus Moore might have been an idealist, but he was also the only person in 50 miles who could teach advanced mathematics and Latin. Garrett needed him. And now he needs you. No, now he just wants the property. Lydia set down her cup with a deliberate clink. The school is incidental. I'm incidental. What matters is this land sits between his main holdings and the creek access he wants to control. With this property, he can cut off water rights to 3 other ranchers, force them to sell cheap, or watch their cattle die of thirst. Ethan absorbed this, adding it to his growing understanding of Samuel Garrett. Not just a bully then, a strategist. The kind of man who thought 5 moves ahead and used people's vulnerabilities as leverage. Dangerous. What time do students start arriving? Around 7. Why? Because I'd rather Garrett's men didn't show up while children are present. Ethan finished his coffee, stood. I'm going to ride into town, ask around, see what the temperature is this morning. That's not staying out of trouble. That's gathering information. Different thing. Lydia's eyes narrowed. You agreed to my terms, Mr. Cole. You leave when I tell you to. And you haven't told me to leave yet. I'm considering it. Consider faster. I'll be back before your students arrive. He was out the door before she could argue further, saddling Buck with quick efficiency and turning toward town as the sun broke fully over the eastern horizon. The ride took 15 minutes, long enough for Ethan to catalog the territory he might need to defend if things went bad. Open ground between the Moore property and town proper. Good sight lines, but no cover. The cottonwoods near the house would provide some protection, but not enough if Garrett brought a dozen men. Pine Hollow was just waking up when Ethan arrived. The general store remained dark, but the saloon was open, catering to men who worked night shifts or drank breakfast. Ethan tied Buck outside and pushed through the doors into dim interior that smelled of old whiskey and older regrets. 3 men sat at a corner table, playing cards with the mechanical focus of people who'd been at it all night. The bartender, different from whoever worked evenings, looked up from polishing glasses with the wary expression of someone who'd learned not to trust strangers. Help you. Whiskey. And information, if you're selling. The bartender poured a shot, slid it across scarred wood. Information costs more than whiskey. Ethan laid a silver dollar on the bar. Samuel Garrett. What's his mood this morning? Haven't seen him. The bartender's eyes flicked to the coin, then back to Ethan's face. But his men were in here till past midnight, drinking heavy and talking loud about some stranger who needed teaching manners. They say when this teaching was supposed to happen? Soon. That's all I heard. The bartender wiped down the bar with deliberate strokes. You that stranger? Might be. Then you should leave Pine Hollow, today. Because when Samuel Garrett decides to teach someone a lesson, that lesson usually ends with Doc Hartley pulling bullets out of folks or the undertaker measuring for pine boxes. Appreciate the advice. Ethan tossed back the whiskey, felt it burn all the way down. Garrett owned the undertaker too? The bartender's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Owns enough that it doesn't matter who holds the deed. Ethan left another coin on the bar and walked back into morning sunlight that felt too cheerful for the conversation he'd just had. Across the street, Sheriff Bradshaw stood outside his office, coffee cup in hand, watching Ethan with the resigned expression of a man who'd predicted exactly this outcome. Thought you were leaving yesterday, Bradshaw called. Plans changed. Plans have a way of doing that. The sheriff gestured toward his office. Got a minute? Inside the sheriff's office was exactly what Ethan expected. Desk covered in paperwork, gun rack with 2 rifles, a single cell in back that currently stood empty. Bradshaw settled behind his desk, gestured for Ethan to take the other chair. You stayed at the Moore place last night. It wasn't a question, but Ethan answered anyway. In the schoolhouse, storage room. Folks noticed. Folks always notice in towns this size. Bradshaw pulled out a cigarette, lit it with a match struck on his boot heel. Garrett's men were asking about you, where you came from, what your business is, whether you're the kind of fool who carries grudges or just the kind who makes poor decisions. What'd you tell them? That you're a stranger passing through who should have kept riding. Bradshaw exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. But you didn't keep riding, did you? You stayed, and now Garrett's taking it personal. Seems like Garrett takes most things personal. That he does, but usually folks have the sense not to give him reasons. The sheriff leaned forward, his expression serious. I'm going to ask you straight, Mr. Cole. What are your intentions regarding Lydia Moore? The question caught Ethan off guard. My intentions? You staying to court her? Marry her? Or are you just playing hero until the novelty wears off and you ride out, leaving her to deal with the consequences? Ethan felt heat rise in his face. I barely know the woman. That's what worries me. You're making enemies on behalf of someone you barely know, which means either you're noble or you're stupid, And in my experience, those two things often look identical from the outside. I'm just trying to make sure she doesn't get hurt. Noble, then, which is worse. Bradshaw stubbed out his cigarette with more force than necessary. Let me tell you how this plays out, son. Garrett's going to come at you. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, but soon. He's going to bring enough men to guarantee he wins, and he's going to make sure everyone in Pine Hollow sees what happens to people who challenge him. You might take a few of his men down before they get you, but they will get you. And when you're dead or run off, Lydia Moore is going to be right back where she started, except now she'll be known as the woman who brought violence to a peaceful town. That'll make her situation worse, not better. So what would you suggest? I'd suggest you leave, today, right now. Go back to whatever ranch you came from and forget Pine Hollow exists. And if I don't? Bradshaw's smile was sad. Then I'll do my best to make sure the paperwork's accurate when I write up the shooting. Small comfort, but it's all I can offer. Ethan stood. Appreciate your honesty, Sheriff. Wish I could offer more than honesty. But in a town owned by Samuel Garrett, honesty's about all I got left. The ride back to the Moore property took longer than the ride in, Ethan's mind working through scenarios and probabilities. Bradshaw was right. This was going to end badly. Garrett wouldn't let the challenge stand, and Ethan's presence only made Lydia a bigger target. The smart move was to leave. Mount up, ride out, go back to his solitary life where the only person he could disappoint was himself. He was still planning his departure when he crested the final rise and saw the horses tied to Lydia's porch. 4 of them. Good stock. Expensive saddles. Garrett's men. Ethan touched his heels to Buck's flanks, and the horse responded with a burst of speed that ate up the distance in seconds. He could see figures on the porch now, 2 men standing, blocking the door, while voices carried from inside the house. Angry voices, Lydia's rising above the others in protest. He was off Buck before the horse fully stopped, his hand going automatically to his pistol as he took the porch steps 2 at a time. Told you 3 times already, she's not interested in selling. Lydia's voice came clear and sharp. And I told you, Miss Moore, that Mr. Garrett's being generous with his offer. You should take it before he changes his mind. The male voice was smooth, educated, carrying authority. Not one of the drunks from yesterday. Someone higher up Garrett's chain of command. The 2 men on the porch turned as Ethan approached. Both wore guns. Both had the look of professional muscle. Not cowboys playing tough, but men who made their living with violence. They moved to block the door, spreading slightly to make themselves harder targets. Private conversation, the larger one said. Move along. Seems to me the lady asked you to leave. Ethan kept his voice level, his hand still near his gun. Might want to respect her wishes. The door opened, and a 3rd man emerged, tall, well-dressed in a suit that probably cost more than most ranchers earned in a month, with silver hair and the kind of face that inspired trust in banks and courtrooms. He looked Ethan up and down with cool assessment. You must be Mr. Cole. Samuel mentioned you. He say anything worth repeating? He said you were troublesome. I'm beginning to see his point. The man adjusted his cuffs with deliberate precision. I'm William Garrett, Samuel's brother. I handle the business side of our family's interests. Didn't realize harassment was a business interest. William's smile was cold. I'm here conducting legitimate commerce, offering Miss Moore fair market value for a property she can't afford to maintain. There's nothing harassing about it. Lydia appeared behind him, her face flushed with anger. Fair market value that's half what the property's worth, and conditional on me leaving within 30 days, which would force me to abandon my students mid-term. We're not responsible for your poor planning, Miss Moore. My poor planning? You're the ones who called the mortgage early. A provision clearly stated in the contract your father signed. Ethan watched this exchange, cataloging details. William Garrett was smoother than his brother, more dangerous in his way. Samuel used force. William used law and contracts and the illusion of legitimacy to get what he wanted. The lady said no, Ethan said quietly. Time for you to leave. William turned his attention back to Ethan. This is a private business discussion. It doesn't concern you. I'm making it concern me. Are you family, legal representative? Do you have any standing whatsoever in this matter? I'm someone who doesn't like seeing 3 men intimidate a woman in her own home. 3 men conducting business, William corrected. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. The 2 guards shifted position slightly, hands drifting toward their weapons. The larger one, the one who told Ethan to move along, smiled like a wolf scenting blood. William held up a hand, stopping his men before the situation exploded. Mr. Cole, I understand you're new to Pine Hollow, so let me explain how things work here. The Garrett family owns 60% of this valley. We employ half the men in town. We hold mortgages on most of the businesses and many of the homes. When we make offers to purchase property, we're not making threats. We're providing opportunities for people to exit difficult situations with dignity intact. Dignity intact. Ethan let the words hang. That what you call forcing people off land they've held for years? I call it business. Something I suspect you understand, being a rancher yourself. William's eyes held calculation. My brother tells me you run cattle north of here. 3-day ride, he heard. That's a long way from home. Must be difficult, leaving your stock unattended this time of year. Calving season, and all. The threat was delivered so smoothly, Ethan almost missed it. Almost. My stock's fine. Appreciate your concern. I'm merely pointing out the risks of extended absence. Cattle have a way of wandering. Fences have a way of coming down. Would be unfortunate if you returned home to find your herd scattered or your property damaged. Lydia's breath caught. Are you threatening him? I'm stating facts about the challenges of ranch management. William smiled, all teeth and poison. Mr. Cole seems like an intelligent man. I'm sure he understands the importance of protecting his own interests rather than involving himself in matters that don't concern him. Ethan felt ice settle into his spine. They'd researched him, asked around, found out about his ranch, and were now threatening it to get him to back down. Smart strategy. Most men would fold rather than risk everything they'd built. Most men weren't 10 years past caring whether they lived or died. Here's what I understand, Ethan said, his voice quiet but carrying steel underneath. I understand you're used to people backing down when you make threats. I understand you think power means you get to do whatever you want. And I understand you're about 5 seconds from learning that threatening my property while standing on someone else's is a good way to get hurt. The wolf smile guard moved his hand to his gun. That sounds like a threat, Mr. Garrett. It's a promise, Ethan replied, meeting the man's eyes directly. Touch your weapon, and I'll put you down before it clears leather. Your friend there will get 1 shot off, maybe 2, but I'll still be standing when he drops. And Mr. William Garrett here will have to explain to his brother why he started a gunfight over a business discussion. That the outcome you were looking for? Silence stretched like wire. William studied Ethan with new interest, reassessing. You have military experience. Some. The way you positioned yourself, the way you're tracking both my men simultaneously while appearing relaxed, that's training. William nodded slowly. Samuel said you were dangerous. He understated the case. I'm not dangerous. I'm just tired of bullies. And I'm tired of this conversation. William gestured to his men. We're leaving. Miss Moore, you have until the end of May to pay your mortgage or accept our offer. After that, the property will be foreclosed and sold at auction. Good day. They filed off the porch, mounted their horses with unhurried precision, and rode toward town at a leisurely pace that suggested men who knew they'd ultimately win regardless of temporary setbacks. Ethan and Lydia stood on the porch, watching them disappear down the road. They know about your ranch, Lydia said finally, her voice small. Seems like. They'll hurt it. Hurt you. To get to me. Probably. She turned to face him, and Ethan saw something crumbling behind her eyes. The steel that had kept her upright through her father's death and months of mounting pressure was finally bending under the weight. This is insane. You need to leave, now, before they destroy everything you've worked for. Too late for that. It's not too late. You can ride out today, be home in 4 days. They won't bother your ranch if you're not here threatening their plans. You believe that? Lydia opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Because they both knew the truth. Men like the Garretts didn't forgive challenges. They remembered, and they punished. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Nothing to be sorry for. I brought this on you. My debts, my pride, my refusal to just accept defeat and move on. Your refusal to surrender to people who have no right to take what's yours. Ethan touched her shoulder, brief and awkward. That's not something to apologize for. The sound of approaching wagon wheels saved them from further conversation. Lydia straightened, wiping quickly at her eyes, transforming back into the school teacher as a farm wagon carrying 3 children rolled up to the house. "Miss Moore!" The youngest, a girl of maybe 6, waved enthusiastically. "We brought eggs. Mama said to give them to you for teaching." And just like that, life continued. Children scrambled down from wagons and off horses, chattering about mathematics homework and spelling tests, utterly oblivious to the violence simmering just beneath Pine Hollow's civilized surface. Lydia greeted each one by name, accepted the eggs and a basket of bread and a jar of preserved peaches. Payment from families who had no cash but refused to accept charity. Ethan retreated to the storage room, feeling out of place among the domestic normalcy. Through the window, he watched Lydia shepherd her students into the schoolhouse, her voice carrying clear and confident as she began the day's lessons. Multiplication tables. Geography. The capital of every state and territory. Ordinary miracles happening in the shadow of approaching disaster. He should leave. Bradshaw was right. William Garrett was right. Staying only made things worse for everyone, especially Lydia. The smart move, the sensible move, was to mount Buck and ride north while he still had a ranch to ride home to. Ethan pulled his rifle from its scabbard, checked the action, counted ammunition. Staying was foolish, reckless, the kind of choice that got men killed and accomplished nothing except satisfying some pointless need to feel like he mattered. He set the rifle aside and started checking his pistol. The day crawled past with agonizing slowness. Ethan alternated between watching the road for trouble and listening to the rhythmic sound of Lydia teaching. Questions and answers, laughter and concentration, the small sounds of children learning. Around noon, she dismissed the students for lunch, and several of them noticed Ethan in the storage room. "Who's that, Miss Moore?" one boy asked, pointing. "A friend who's staying for a few days. Mind your manners." The children studied Ethan with the unblinking curiosity of the young, clearly trying to determine if he was interesting or just another boring adult. He gave them a small wave, which seemed to satisfy most of them, though the oldest, a Mexican boy of maybe 13, kept watching with knowing eyes that suggested he understood more about adult tensions than a child should. After lunch, Lydia resumed lessons, and Ethan went back to his vigil. Still no sign of Garrett's men. That worried him more than an outright attack would have. They were planning something, waiting for the right moment, building to something bigger than a simple confrontation. The students departed around 3 o'clock, and Lydia emerged from the schoolhouse looking exhausted. She found Ethan sharpening his knife on a whetstone, the rhythmic scrape of steel on stone filling the quiet afternoon. "They're planning something," she said without preamble. "I know. William Garrett doesn't make threats lightly. If he said they'd hurt your ranch, they will. Let them try. You can't fight the Garrett family, Ethan. Nobody can. That's what my father never understood. He thought being right mattered, thought truth and justice would prevail, but they don't. Power prevails. Money prevails. And the Garretts have both." Ethan tested the knife edge against his thumb, nodded satisfaction. "Your father sounds like a good man." He was, but being good got him worked to death trying to save everyone while sacrificing himself. I won't let you make the same mistake. Appreciate the concern, but this is my choice. Why? Lydia's voice cracked. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. Don't owe me anything. You could be home safe instead of here risking everything for a woman you met yesterday. It was a fair question, deserved an honest answer. Ethan set down the knife, met her eyes directly. During the war, I followed orders. Did things I'm not proud of because men with authority told me to. Saw people hurt who didn't deserve it, and I walked away because getting involved wasn't my job. After the war, I kept walking away. Built a life where I didn't have to care about anyone except myself. He paused, searching for words that felt true. Yesterday, watching Garrett put hands on you, I could have walked away again. Should have, probably. But I didn't. And now I can't, even if I wanted to. Because walking away is what I've been doing for 10 years, and I'm tired of it. So I'm what? Your redemption? You're someone who deserves better than being crushed by rich men playing power games. That's enough. Lydia stared at him, emotions warring across her face, anger and gratitude and frustration all tangled together. You're going to get yourself killed. Maybe, but at least I'll die doing something that matters instead of just existing. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Probably, but it's true. She laughed then, short and bitter. My father would have liked you. He had the same stubborn streak, the same inability to see when a fight was lost. Fight's not lost till you stop fighting. More wisdom from your military days. More wisdom from 10 years of regret. The silence between them shifted again, becoming something deeper than acquaintance. Not quite friendship, but moving in that direction. Two damaged people finding unexpected common ground in shared stubbornness. I'm making stew for dinner, Lydia said finally. You should eat something before whatever's coming arrives. They shared the meal in her kitchen as evening light slanted through western windows, turning everything gold and amber. The stew was simple, venison and vegetables, but prepared with care that spoke of practice and attention. They ate mostly in silence, exhausted by tension and uncertainty, finding comfort in ordinary rituals. Ethan was helping wash dishes when Buck nickered sharply from the stable. Alert. Warning. He was at the window in 2 strides, Lydia right behind him. The sun was setting, long shadows stretching across the property, but he could see riders approaching from town. Not 4 this time. Not 6. 12 men. Maybe 15. Hard to count in the fading light. All armed. All riding with the deliberate pace of men coming to finish business. Samuel Garrett led them, visible even at distance by his size and the way the others deferred to him. They spread out as they approached, encircling the property with professional precision. Not drunk cowboys. Hired guns who knew their business. Get in the house, Ethan said quietly. Lock the doors. Stay away from windows. What are you going to do? Talk to them. See if talking works. And if it doesn't? He didn't answer. Didn't need to. They both knew what came after talking failed. Lydia grabbed his arm as he turned toward the door. Ethan, you can still leave, out the back. Take your horse and ride north. They want me, not you. They want both of us now, and I'm not running. Then you're a fool. Wouldn't be the first time someone called me that. He stepped onto the porch as the riders reached the property line. They stopped there, just at the edge of Lydia's land, making a show of respecting boundaries while their sheer numbers made the respect meaningless. Samuel Garrett dismounted, walked forward until he stood maybe 20 feet from the porch, close enough to talk, far enough to draw and fire if needed. Mr. Cole, didn't expect to see you still here. Plans changed. So, my brother mentioned. Garrett smiled, but nothing about it reached his eyes. He also mentioned you made some threats about putting down my men, about teaching us lessons. That true? Might have said something along those lines. See, that puts me in an awkward position. Garrett gestured at the men behind him. I run a business based on reputation. When strangers ride into my territory and start making threats, that damages my reputation. Makes people think Samuel Garrett is weak, that he can be challenged without consequences. Not interested in challenging you, just interested in making sure Miss Moore gets fair treatment. Fair treatment? Garrett savored the words. Interesting phrase from a man who pulled a gun on my men yesterday, who stood in my brother's face and threatened violence. That your idea of fair treatment? Your men were drunk and inappropriate. Your brother was making threats of his own. I responded accordingly. You responded like a man looking for trouble. I responded like a man who saw something wrong and chose not to walk away from it. Garrett studied him, head tilted like a predator assessing prey. William did some asking around about you. Found out you run a small operation north of here. Cattle ranch. Remote. No hired hands. No family. He paused, letting implications settle. That's interesting. Man alone like that, he'd be vulnerable if something happened. Accident, fire, stampede. So many ways a ranch can go wrong when there's nobody around to prevent it. The threat was clear now, spoken aloud for both Ethan and Lydia to hear. You touch my property, Ethan said quietly, and I'll burn yours to the ground. One of Garrett's men laughed. Big words from one man facing 15. Only takes one man with a match. Your boss got any idea how much his ranch is worth? His house? His barns full of expensive stock? I can't stop all of you from hurting me, but I can make damn sure Samuel Garrett loses everything he's built before I go down." The laughter stopped. Garrett's expression went flat and dangerous. "You're threatening to burn my ranch." "I'm promising that if you hurt what's mine, I'll hurt what's yours." "Seems fair." "There's 15 of us and one of you. 15 witnesses if I put a bullet in you right now. Every man here would have to explain to a judge how their boss got shot in cold blood on someone else's property. That the legacy you want, Garrett, that the reputation you're protecting." Silence stretched across the darkening yard. Behind Garrett, men shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't what they'd signed up for. A standoff with a crazy man willing to kill and be killed over principles instead of property. Garrett's hand drifted toward his gun. "Maybe I shoot you first. Call it self-defense." "Go ahead. But you better not miss. Because I won't." The moment balanced on a knife edge. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and bodies would hit the ground. Ethan could see Garrett calculating, weighing options, trying to find an angle that let him win without unacceptable cost. Then Lydia's voice cut through the tension like a bell. "Samuel Garrett, you bring violence to my property, and I'll make sure every newspaper from here to Denver knows about it. I'll write letters to governors, contact the army, make so much noise that even your political connections won't protect you." She stood in the doorway, wrapped in evening shadow but visible enough, small and defiant against 15 armed men. Garrett's attention shifted to her. "You don't have that kind of reach, Lydia. My father taught children of senators and judges, educated the sons of railroad magnates and newspaper editors. You think I don't have letters I can send, favors I can call in?" Her voice carried absolute conviction. "You hurt this man, hurt my property, and I'll spend every remaining dollar making your life hell. That a trade you want to make?" Another calculation, another moment of weighing costs against benefits. Finally, Garrett smiled, cold and knowing. "This isn't over." "Didn't figure it was," Ethan agreed. "You got until the end of May. After that, this property belongs to me one way or another. And you, Mr. Cole, I'd watch my back on the ride home. Lots of dangerous country between here and your ranch. Easy for a man to have accidents." He turned, mounted up, and led his men back toward town at that same deliberate pace. Not fleeing, not defeated, just withdrawing to plan the next move. Ethan stood on the porch until they disappeared into gathering darkness, his hand still near his gun, every muscle tight with adrenaline that had nowhere to go. Behind him, Lydia made a sound, half laugh, half sob. "We're gonna die, aren't we?" she said. "Probably," Ethan admitted. "Good. At least I'll die fighting instead of surrendering." He turned to find her smiling, bright and fierce and absolutely terrified. "Coffee?" she offered. "Coffee sounds perfect." They went inside together, two fools who'd chosen the hardest possible path and somehow found companionship in shared impossibility. Outside, night fell over Pine Hollow like a curtain, and somewhere in the darkness, Samuel Garrett was already planning their destruction. The coffee sat untouched between them, cooling in the lamplight while Lydia and Ethan absorbed what had just happened. The kitchen felt smaller now, more intimate, like the walls had drawn closer during the confrontation outside. Through the window, darkness pressed against the glass, complete and absolute. No moon yet, just stars scattered across Wyoming's sky like scattered salt. Lydia's hands trembled as she wrapped them around her cup. Not fear, Ethan thought. Aftermath. The body's delayed response to danger past. "You threatened to burn his ranch," she said finally. Seemed appropriate at the time. "That's insane. You know that's insane." "Probably, but it worked." She laughed, sharp and brittle. "It didn't work. It just postponed whatever's coming. You heard him. This isn't over." "No, but we bought time." "Time for what? To dig our graves deeper?" Lydia set down her cup with enough force to slosh coffee onto the table. "Ethan, you're talking about going to war with the most powerful man in the valley, a man who controls the sheriff, the judge, half the businesses in town. What exactly is your plan here?" "Don't have one yet." "That's not reassuring." "Didn't figure it would be." Ethan finally took a sip of his coffee, grimaced at the temperature. "But I know we've got 6 weeks before your mortgage comes due. 6 weeks is enough time to figure something out." "Figure out what? I don't have $1,500. I don't have $15 that isn't already spoken for. Even if I sold everything I own, the furniture, the piano, my mother's jewelry, I wouldn't raise half what's needed. What about those families your father helped? The ones you mentioned who have connections back east? Lydia's expression went carefully neutral. I've written letters, asked for loans. Most haven't responded. The ones who did sent polite refusals and wishes for my success. Nobody wants to loan money to a woman with no collateral and no prospects. Not even the senators and judges? Especially not them. They send their children west for education, Mr. Cole, not to entangle themselves in frontier property disputes. Her voice carried the weight of disappointments already absorbed. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but there's no miracle coming, no last-minute rescue, just me and my debts and 6 weeks until Samuel Garrett takes everything my father built. Ethan heard the resignation underneath her words. Not quite surrender, but close. The sound of someone who'd exhausted every option and found them all wanting. He'd made that sound himself once, years ago, when he'd realized the war had broken something in him that couldn't be fixed by going home and pretending nothing had changed. What if we paid it? He said quietly. Lydia's head snapped up. What? Your mortgage. What if we just paid it off? We. There is no we. You're a stranger who arrived 2 days ago. This isn't your problem. I'm making it my problem. Why would you do that? Good question. Why would he hand over $1,500 to a woman he barely knew? It represented years of careful saving, the security he'd built against uncertain futures. Giving it away made no practical sense. But then staying in Pine Hollow made no practical sense either. Because I can, Ethan said. Because you need it. Because watching Garrett take this place just proves rich men always win, and I'm tired of that being true. Lydia stared at him like he'd grown a second head. You have $1,500, more or less, just sitting around, available? In a strong box under my cabin floor. Been saving for 10 years. Figured I'd need it eventually for expanding the herd or buying better stock. He shrugged. Turns out I need it for this instead. I can't accept that. Didn't offer it as a gift. Then what are you offering it as? Ethan hadn't thought that far ahead. What was he offering? A loan? A partnership? The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to examine. We'll figure that out later, he said finally. Right now what matters is keeping Garrett from taking your property. Ethan, Lydia's voice went soft. That's your future. Your security. You can't just hand it over to someone you met 2 days ago. Why not? It's my money. Because it's insane. Because you don't know me. Don't know if I'm trustworthy or honest or even capable of running this school successfully. For all you know, I'll take your money and disappear. You won't. How can you possibly know that? Because you're still here. Ethan met her eyes across the table. You could have run months ago. Could have sold to Garrett for whatever he offered and started fresh somewhere else. But you stayed, kept teaching, kept fighting. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Tears welled in Lydia's eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. She wiped at them angrily, like they were betraying her. You don't understand. My father died trying to save everyone. Worked himself to death being noble and principled while drowning in debt. I won't let you make the same mistake. That's my choice to make. It's a stupid choice. Maybe, but it's mine. They sat in charged silence, the air between them crackling with unspoken things. Ethan could see her wrestling with it, pride against necessity, independence against desperation, the desire to refuse help warring with the knowledge that refusal meant losing everything. Finally, Lydia spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. If you do this, if you actually pay off my mortgage, I'll pay you back. Every cent. I don't know how or when, but I will. Don't worry about that now. I'm worrying about it right this second. I won't be indebted to you or anyone else. She straightened, steel returning to her spine. If we do this, we do it as a business arrangement. A loan with terms, interest, a repayment schedule, something legal and binding. Fine. I'm serious, Ethan. I won't be your charity case. I know. Then say it. Say you understand this is a loan, not a gift. It's a loan. Ethan agreed, though privately he had no intention of ever collecting. But if calling it a loan let her accept the help, he'd call it whatever she needed. Lydia sagged back in her chair, exhaustion written in every line of her body. This is crazy. All of it, you threatening Garrett, me threatening to write letters I may or may not have connections to send. You offering to pay debts that aren't yours. What are we doing? Surviving, best we can. This doesn't feel like survival. This feels like suicide with extra steps. Ethan smiled despite everything. Probably accurate. A knock at the door froze them both. Ethan's hand went to his gun as he stood, positioning himself between Lydia and the entrance. It was past 9 o'clock, late for social calls in frontier towns where most folks rose with the sun. Who is it? Lydia called. Sheriff Bradshaw, Miss Moore. Need a word if you've got a minute. Ethan relaxed slightly but kept his hand near his weapon as Lydia opened the door. Bradshaw stood on the porch, hat in hands, looking older and more tired than he had that morning. Evening, Sheriff. Is something wrong? That depends on your perspective. Bradshaw's eyes found Ethan. Heard you had visitors earlier. Figured I should check nobody got shot. Everyone's still breathing, Ethan confirmed. That's something, at least. Bradshaw stepped inside when Lydia gestured, accepting coffee he probably didn't want out of politeness. Want to tell me what happened? Ethan gave him the abbreviated version. Garrett showing up with 15 men, threats exchanged, standoff resolved without gunfire. Bradshaw listened without interruption, his expression growing progressively grimmer. You threatened to burn his ranch, Bradshaw said when Ethan finished. Word travels fast. Town this size, everything travels fast. By morning, everyone in Pine Hollow will know you and Garrett came within a breath of killing each other. The sheriff set down his untouched coffee. That changes things. How so? Before, this was personal. Garrett angry at a stranger who disrespected him. But now it's public. Now everyone's watching to see if Samuel Garrett lets a drifter challenge him and walk away. He can't back down without looking weak, and looking weak means other folks might get ideas about challenging him too. Lydia paled. So what are you saying? I'm saying it's going to get worse before it gets better. Garrett will come at you hard and soon, and he'll make it public enough that everyone knows he won. Bradshaw turned to Ethan. You need to leave, tonight, right now. Take the North Road and don't stop until you're out of the valley. Can't do that. Can't or won't. Both. Bradshaw's jaw tightened. Son, I've been wearing this badge for 15 years. I've seen more young men die from stubbornness than from actual malice. You're walking that same path. Appreciate the concern, but I'm staying. Why? What's worth dying for in a town you don't know, for a woman you just met? The question hung in the lamplight. Ethan could have given a dozen answers. Duty, principle, the need to stand for something after years of standing for nothing. But the truth was simpler and harder to articulate. Because walking away is what I've done my whole life, he said finally, and I'm tired of it. Bradshaw studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I understand that. I do. But understanding doesn't change facts. Garrett's going to come for you, and when he does, I won't be able to stop him. Not asking you to. You should be. You should be asking for law and order and all the things that badge is supposed to represent. Bradshaw picked up his hat. But we both know the law in Pine Hollow belongs to whoever's got the most money. And that ain't you. After the sheriff left, Lydia locked the door and leaned against it, eyes closed. He's right, you know. Garrett's going to kill you. He's going to try. That's not comforting. Wasn't meant to be. Ethan moved to the window, scanning darkness for movement. But trying and succeeding are different things. You really think you can stand against 15 armed men? No. But I think I can make it cost more than Garrett's willing to pay. Lydia crossed to stand beside him. Both of them reflected ghostly in the dark window glass. My father used to say that standing up to bullies was about making the cost too high. But he's dead, Ethan. Dead from stress and overwork and fighting battles he couldn't win. I don't want that for you. What do you want? The question surprised her. She turned, meeting his eyes in reflection. I want to keep my school, keep teaching, keep my father's dream alive, but not at the cost of your life. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. In Pine Hollow, they are. They stood in silence, shoulders almost touching, two people bound together by circumstance and stubbornness, and something neither wanted to name. We should sleep, Lydia said finally. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. Tomorrow's going to be worse than difficult. I know. She touched his arm briefly, a gesture of connection or gratitude or both. Thank you for staying, for offering help you don't owe, for being foolish enough to care about a stranger's problems. You're welcome. Ethan returned to the storage room, checked his weapons one more time, and lay down on the narrow cot fully clothed. Sleep came in fits and starts, his mind churning through scenarios and possibilities. Garrett would come. The only question was when and how. He was drifting in that space between waking and sleeping when Buck's sharp whinny jerked him fully alert. Ethan rolled off the cot, grabbed his rifle, and moved to the window in one fluid motion. The moon had risen while he dozed, painting everything in silver and shadow. At first he saw nothing unusual, just the stable, the yard, the cottonwood swaying in night breeze. Then movement caught his eye. Near the stable, low to the ground. Someone was there. Ethan slipped out the storage room door, moving silent across packed earth, rifle ready. The figure was crouched by the stable wall, and in the moonlight Ethan could see what he was doing, pouring liquid from a can along the base of the wooden structure. Kerosene. The man struck a match. Step away from there. Ethan's voice cut through the darkness, rifle leveled. Nice and slow. The figure froze, then straightened. Young, maybe 25, wearing range clothes and the expression of someone who hadn't expected to get caught. The match burned down toward his fingers. Drop it, Ethan ordered. The match fell. Ethan watched it arc through darkness toward the kerosene-soaked wood, time slowing as he realized what was about to happen. He fired. The bullet struck dirt 6 inches from the falling match, the impact throwing up enough soil to smother the flame before it could catch. The young man bolted, running for the tree line with the desperate speed of panic. Ethan could have shot him, should have, probably, but killing a fleeing man in the back wasn't something he'd do even for this. He let him run. Lights blazed in the main house. Lydia appeared on the porch, a rifle of her own in her hands. What happened? Arson attempt. 1 man. He's gone now. Ethan moved to the stable, examining the kerosene pooled against the wood. Enough to turn the structure into an inferno if the match had landed. Enough to kill Buck and destroy months of feed stored inside. This was Garrett's answer. Not confrontation, not violence, just fire in the night and the message it sent. I can hurt you anytime I want. We need to stay alert, Ethan said, already scanning the tree line for other threats. That might have been a distraction. But no other attack came, just silence and darkness and the lingering smell of kerosene. They spent the rest of the night taking turns on watch, rifle, and coffee for company, waiting for dawn. Lydia proved herself competent with the weapon, moving through the house with quiet efficiency as she checked windows and doors. Not her first time dealing with threats, Ethan realized. She'd been living like this for months, maybe longer. The eastern sky was just starting to gray when Lydia spoke from the kitchen doorway. This is what it'll be like now, isn't it? Waiting for the next attack, never knowing when or how they'll come. Probably. I can't ask my students to come here, can't put children at risk. So we moved the school, teach somewhere else temporarily. Where? The church won't let me use their space. The pastor answers to Garrett's donations. Same with the town hall. Every building in Pine Hollow is either owned by Garrett or by someone too scared to cross him. Ethan thought about this while dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. What about teaching here but only during full daylight? Parents drop children off at sunup, pick them up by mid-afternoon. Anyone comes near the property while students are present, they're doing it in front of witnesses. That might work, Lydia considered. Garrett's careful about his reputation. He won't risk looking like a man who terrorizes children. Then that's what we do. They made it official that morning, Lydia writing a note to all the families explaining the temporary schedule change. She didn't mention the arson attempt, no need to panic parents, just said there were concerns about property security that required daytime-only instruction. Most families understood. A few pulled their children from school entirely, unwilling to risk any association with someone Garrett had marked as an enemy. Lydia accepted these withdrawals with quiet dignity, but Ethan saw how each one hurt. The next 3 days followed a pattern. Students arrived at dawn, left by mid-afternoon. Ethan and Lydia took turns on watch through the nights, drinking too much coffee and sleeping too little. No more arson attempts, but they found evidence of someone watching the property, boot prints in the mud near the tree line, a cigarette stub still warm when Ethan discovered it. Garrett's men, circling like wolves, waiting for an opening. On the fourth morning, William Garrett returned. He came alone this time, riding a fine bay gelding and wearing his expensive suit like armor. Ethan met him at the property line, rifle visible but not quite threatening. "Mr. Cole, may I have a word with Miss Moore?" "Depends on the word. I'm here to make a final offer." William dismounted, moving with the deliberate calm of someone certain of their safety. One last chance to resolve this situation peacefully. Lydia emerged from the schoolhouse, dismissing her students early and sending them home before joining Ethan at the property line. William tipped his hat to her with exaggerated courtesy. "Miss Moore, you look tired." "Sleepless nights tend to have that effect." "I imagine they do, which is why I'm here." William pulled a document from his jacket. "My brother has authorized me to make you an improved offer, $2,000 for your property, with 60 days to vacate instead of 30. That's more than fair market value and twice what the land's worth to anyone except us." The answer is still no. "Are you certain? Because the alternative is foreclosure at the end of May, which will net you nothing and leave you homeless with your reputation in tatters." William's smile was practiced, professional. "Whereas accepting our offer lets you walk away with money in pocket and dignity intact." Dignity. Lydia tasted the word. "You think selling my father's life work to the men who killed him preserves dignity?" William's expression flickered with something that might have been annoyance. "Your father killed himself with stress and overwork. We had nothing to do with his death. You had everything to do with it. You called his loans early, pressured his creditors, made it impossible for him to refinance or restructure his debts. You strangled him financially and then stood back and watched him collapse." "That's business, Miss Moore, not murder. Tell me the difference." William tucked the document back in his jacket. "You're letting emotion cloud your judgment, and you're being influenced by a stranger with his own agenda." His eyes shifted to Ethan. "Have you asked Mr. Cole why he's really here? What he hopes to gain from this situation?" "He's here because he's a good man," Lydia said flatly. "No man is that good. Everyone wants something." William studied Ethan with calculating eyes. "What is it you want, Mr. Cole? Marriage to a desperate woman? Access to property you could never afford on your own? Or maybe just the satisfaction of playing hero for once in your miserable life?" Ethan kept his voice level. "I want you off this property before I stop being polite." "Polite?" William laughed. "You threatened to burn my brother's ranch and you call this polite? This is me giving you a chance to leave peacefully. Next time I won't be so generous." William's smile vanished, replaced by cold calculation. "You're making a mistake, both of you. This offer won't come again." "Good," Lydia said, "because refusing it once was insulting enough." William mounted his horse with unhurried precision, looking down at them from superior height. "You have 3 weeks until your mortgage comes due. 3 weeks to change your mind or accept the consequences. After that, this property belongs to us, and you belong nowhere." He rode away at a walk, confident and unhurried, leaving his threat hanging in the spring air. Lydia waited until he disappeared from view before her shoulders sagged. 3 weeks. 21 days. Then it's over. "Then we have 21 days to get to my ranch and back," Ethan said. She turned to him. "What?" "The money. It's a 4-day ride each way. We leave tomorrow, get back with a week to spare. Pay off your mortgage before Garrett knows what happened." "You want me to ride to your ranch? For 8 days? Leaving the school closed and the property unguarded? You got a better idea?" Lydia opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Because they both knew there was no better idea, no miracle solution, just hard choices and desperate measures. "I can't close the school for 8 days. The parents who are still sending their children will understand, or they won't. But it doesn't matter if there's no school left to send them to. She stared at him, working through implications. If we both leave, Garrett will know. He'll assume we're running, might even follow us. Let him try. I know that territory better than his men ever will. And if something happens, if we get caught in a storm or injured or lost, then we deal with it, same as we're dealing with everything else. Ethan met her eyes. Lydia, this is the only play we've got. Stay here and Garrett burns us out or shoots us down. Leave together and we have a chance. A small chance. Better than no chance. She was quiet for a long time, staring at the house her father built, the school that represented his life's work and her inheritance. Finally, she nodded. We leave tomorrow at first light, but I'm bringing a rifle and using it if necessary. Wouldn't expect anything else. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Lydia wrote letters to parents explaining the temporary closure, packed supplies, food, blankets, ammunition. Ethan checked Buck's shoes, examined his own gear, planned the route north that would keep them away from major trails where Garrett's men might intercept. That night, they took final watch together, sitting on the porch as stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Somewhere in the darkness, men might be watching, planning, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Are we really doing this? Lydia asked softly. Seems like. It's insane. Most worthwhile things are. She was quiet for a moment, then spoke again. Ethan, why did you really stay? The truth this time. He considered the question, really considered it, searching for honest answers beneath convenient rationalizations. Because I spent 10 years building a life where I didn't need anyone and nobody needed me, he said finally. And somewhere along the way I forgot that needing and being needed is what makes us human. When I saw Garrett pushing you around, something in me remembered, woke up, and I couldn't go back to sleep even if I wanted to. Lydia's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers cool against his calloused palm. Thank you for waking up. They sat like that until dawn began to paint the eastern sky. Two people preparing to gamble everything on a desperate ride north toward money buried under floorboards and futures hanging in the balance. Behind them, Pine Hollow slept. Ahead, 4 days of hard riding awaited. And somewhere in between, Samuel Garrett was planning their destruction with the patient certainty of a man who'd never lost a fight he couldn't buy. They rode out before the sun cleared the eastern mountains, moving north through mist that clung to the valley floor like smoke. Lydia sat her father's old mare with the practiced ease of someone raised around horses, her rifle secured in a scabbard Marcus Moore had probably carried himself. She tied her hair back practical and tight, wore men's trousers under a split riding skirt, and carried herself with the quiet determination of someone committed to a course, even knowing its dangers. Ethan had chosen the route carefully, not the main trail north, but a series of game paths and cattle tracks that wound through rougher country where Garrett's men were less likely to patrol. Harder riding, more time in the saddle, but safer. Probably safer. Nothing was certain when you were running from men with resources and motivation. They rode in silence for the first hour, both scanning the terrain for followers, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Birds sang their morning chorus. A deer ghosted through aspens, turning green with new leaf. The world going about its business, indifferent to human drama playing out beneath its sky. Around mid-morning, Lydia spoke for the first time since leaving. How far today? 25 miles if we push. There's a creek crossing where we can rest the horses and make camp before dark. And you're certain no one's following? Ethan glanced back at the empty trail behind them. Not certain, but if they are, they're better at it than I am at spotting them. That's not reassuring. Wasn't meant to be. She smiled despite the tension. You have a gift for honesty, even when lies would be kinder. Lies get people killed, especially out here where mistakes have consequences. They rode on, and gradually the silence between them shifted from wary to companionable. Lydia proved herself a capable rider, adjusting naturally to the terrain, giving her mare the freedom to pick footing through rocky sections while maintaining awareness of their surroundings. Not her first time traveling rough country, Ethan noted. Marcus Moore had apparently taught his daughter practical skills alongside Latin and mathematics. Around noon, they stopped to rest the horses and eat cold biscuits Lydia had packed. They were sitting in the shade of a rocky outcrop when Lydia asked the question that had probably been building all morning. "What's your ranch like?" Ethan chewed slowly, considering his answer. "Small. Maybe 200 acres of decent grazing land. Cabin's nothing fancy. One room, loft for sleeping. Got a barn, corral, enough stock to keep me fed and make a modest profit most years." "Sounds lonely." That was the point. "And now?" He understood what she was really asking. "And now that you've left isolation behind, gotten involved with people again, do you regret it?" "Now I'm not sure what the point is anymore," he admitted. "Spent 10 years building something that didn't need anyone else. Thought that made me safe. Turns out it just made me alone." Lydia pulled her knees up, wrapped her arms around them in a gesture that made her look younger than her years. "My father used to say loneliness and solitude were different things. That solitude was a choice and loneliness was a prison." Your father sounds like he was wise. He was. Also stubborn and idealistic and completely incapable of recognizing when he was being taken advantage of. Her voice softened with memory and grief. He believed people were fundamentally good, that given the chance they'd choose right over wrong, kindness over cruelty. He died still believing that despite all evidence to the contrary. Maybe he was right. "You've met Samuel Garrett. You really think people are fundamentally good?" Ethan watched an eagle circle overhead, riding thermals with effortless grace. "I think most people are trying their best with what they've got. Some have more capacity for good than others, and some, like Garrett, have more capacity for taking what they want regardless of who it hurts." That's a diplomat's answer. "I'm no diplomat." "No. You're just a man who threatens to burn ranches and stands alone against 15 armed men." She studied him with frank curiosity. "What happened in the war, Ethan? What did you do that you're still running from?" The question hit harder than he'd expected. He could have deflected, changed the subject, maintained the walls he'd built around those memories. But sitting here with Lydia, both of them risking everything on a desperate gamble, walls seemed pointless. "I followed orders," he said quietly. "Burned farms, took supplies from people who were already starving, watched towns get destroyed because some general decided they were strategic targets. And I told myself it was war, that I was just a soldier doing my duty, that the responsibility belonged to officers making decisions, not to men like me pulling triggers." "But you don't believe that anymore." "I believe we're all responsible for what we do, regardless of who ordered it, and I believe I spent 10 years in isolation because that felt like less punishment than I deserved, but more than I could bear inflicting on anyone else through proximity." Lydia was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the space between them and took his hand, the same gesture she'd made last night on the porch. Connection. Understanding. Acceptance of complicated truth. "My father would have liked you," she said. "He always said the people most worth knowing were the ones who'd made mistakes and learned from them rather than those who'd never been tested enough to fail. Your father collected wisdom the way some men collect coins. He collected it. I'm just trying to remember it." She squeezed his hand once, then released it. "We should keep moving. I'd rather make that creek crossing before dark." They rode through the afternoon, the sun arcing overhead and beginning its descent toward the western peaks. The country grew rougher, pine forests replacing open grassland, rocky slopes requiring careful navigation. Lydia handled it all with quiet competence, and Ethan found himself relaxing marginally. If Garrett's men were following, they'd have shown themselves by now. The likelihood of ambush decreased with every mile north. The creek was exactly where Ethan remembered. A clear stream running cold from snowmelt, bordered by willows and cottonwoods just beginning to leaf out. They made camp in a sheltered spot where the trees would hide their fire, unsaddled the horses and let them graze while water heated for coffee. Lydia set about making dinner from their supplies with the efficiency of long practice. Salt, pork, and beans, biscuits reheated on rocks near the fire. Simple food that tasted like luxury after a long day's ride. "How much farther?" she asked as they ate. 3 more days, maybe 2.5 if we push hard tomorrow." "And you're absolutely certain the money's there? That it hasn't been disturbed or stolen?" "As certain as I can be. Place is remote. No neighbors for miles. and I checked it before leaving for Pine Hollow. Box was exactly where I left it. Lydia nodded, working through calculations in her head. $1,500. That's what I owe. But what about the rest? How much is in that box? Enough. Ethan. About 1,800. Maybe 2,000 if the value of some bonds held steady. She set down her plate. You're giving me almost everything you've saved in 10 years. Loaning, he corrected. We agreed it was a loan. We agreed to words that made me feel better about accepting help. But we both know I'll never be able to pay you back. You don't know that. I run a school that doesn't charge tuition. Even if I wanted to start charging, half my students' families can barely feed themselves. Where exactly do you think repayment's going to come from? It was a fair question. One Ethan had deliberately not examined too closely because the answer complicated everything. We'll figure it out, he said finally. That's your answer for everything. We'll figure it out. As if hope and determination can solve problems that require actual money and resources. Hope and determination got us this far. This far being 3 days from your ranch, running from a man who wants us dead, gambling everything on a box of money that may or may not still be there. Lydia laughed, sharp and slightly desperate. When you put it that way, hope and determination don't sound like much. They're what we've got. I know. That's what terrifies me. They cleaned up dinner in silence, both occupied with thoughts too complicated for easy conversation. The sun set in shades of amber and rose, painting the mountains in fire. Night birds began their calling. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, lonely and wild and perfectly suited to wilderness that cared nothing for human concerns. Ethan had laid out their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire when Lydia spoke again. Can I ask you something personal? Depends on the question. Have you ever been married? In love? Had someone you built a life with? The question surprised him with its directness. Once? Long time ago. Before the war. What happened? She married someone else while I was fighting. Can't say I blame her. Wasn't much point waiting for a man who might not come home or might come home broken. Did you love her? Thought I did at the time. Now I'm not sure I knew what love meant. I was 20 years old and she was pretty, and I was about to march off to war. Seems like that's more about fear and loneliness than actual love. Lydia absorbed this, staring into the fire. I was engaged once, before my father died. A man named Thomas Crawford. He taught at a school back east, wanted me to give up teaching and move to Boston to be a proper wife. I'm guessing you said no. I said yes, actually. Thought I wanted that life. Security, respectability, someone to share burdens with. Her smile was bitter. Then my father died, and the debts came due, and Thomas suddenly decided he didn't want a wife with financial complications. Broke the engagement by letter. Couldn't even do it in person. His loss. That's what I told myself, but part of me wonders if he was right. If I'm too stubborn and too proud and too attached to lost causes to ever be someone's partner. Ethan looked at her across the dancing firelight. This woman who'd faced down drunk bullies and threatened land barons, who'd kept teaching despite crushing debt, who'd ridden out into wilderness on faith that a stranger's word was good. Too stubborn and proud, maybe. But not too anything to be worth partnership. Thomas Crawford was a fool, he said quietly. And if he couldn't see that, then he didn't deserve what he was giving up. Lydia's eyes met his, something shifting in their depths. You barely know me. I know enough. Know you fight for what matters. Know you don't quit when things get hard. Know you'd rather lose everything than surrender your principles. He paused, choosing words carefully. That's more than most people show in a lifetime, let alone a few days. Ethan, her voice went soft. What are we doing here? Making camp, resting horses, heading north for money. That's not what I mean. He knew what she meant. Could see it in the way she looked at him, the way casual touches had become more frequent, the way silence between them had shifted from awkward to intimate. Something was building here in the wilderness, something neither had planned but both were beginning to recognize. I don't know, he admitted, but whatever it is, we can figure it out after we save your school. Always figuring things out later with you. Seems safer than figuring them out now when we've got 3 days of hard riding and potential ambush ahead. Lydia laughed, and the sound chased some of the tension from the air. Practical to a fault. That's going to be carved on your tombstone. Better than died doing something stupid, which is what most folks would carve on mine. They settled into their bedrolls, fire burning low between them, stars emerging like diamonds scattered on black velvet. Ethan took first watch, rifle across his knees, listening to Lydia's breathing slow and deepen into sleep. She looked younger when sleeping, the lines of worry and stress smoothing from her face. Vulnerable in a way she never allowed herself while awake. He found himself wanting to protect that vulnerability. Not because she needed protecting, Lydia Moore could clearly handle herself, but because she shouldn't have to. Shouldn't have to sleep with a rifle within reach and wake, wondering if today was the day violence finally caught them. Midnight came and went. Ethan woke Lydia for her watch, traded places, and fell into uneasy sleep filled with dreams of fire and pursuit and choices that couldn't be unmade. Dawn arrived cold and clear, frost turning the grass silver in early light. They broke camp quickly, both eager to put more distance between themselves and Pine Hollow. The horses seemed refreshed, moving out with good energy despite yesterday's hard miles. The second day's riding took them higher into the mountains, following game trails that wound through pine forests so thick the sun barely penetrated. Cooler here, the air thin and sharp with altitude. They saw no other humans, just deer and elk, a black bear that shambled across their path without apparent interest, ravens calling from high branches. By evening, they'd covered another 25 miles and made camp near a spring that bubbled from granite rock. Lydia had grown quieter as the day progressed, her expression increasingly pensive. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked as they prepared dinner. "Nothing. Everything. I don't know." She stirred beans with unnecessary force. "I keep thinking about what happens after. After we get the money. After we pay the mortgage. What then? Then you keep teaching. Keep your father's school running. And you go back to your ranch? Go back to being alone?" That was the plan. Was. The question hung between them, weighted with implications. Ethan could feel the ground shifting, the careful distance they'd maintained beginning to collapse. "I don't know anymore," he said honestly. "A week ago, being alone was all I wanted. Now," he trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. "Now?" Lydia prompted. "Now I'm not sure what I want. Except to make sure you're safe, and your school survives, and Garrett doesn't win. And after that's settled? Lydia, I can't think past getting that money and getting back alive. Anything beyond that is more future than I can handle right now." She nodded, accepting this even if it wasn't the answer she'd hoped for. They ate in silence, the weight of unspoken possibilities pressing down like the darkness gathering between the trees. The third day brought them to within 10 miles of Ethan's ranch, and with proximity came a new tension. What if the box wasn't there? What if someone had found it despite the remote location? What if his entire plan was built on assumptions that 10 years could pass without disaster? "Stop spiraling," Lydia said around mid-afternoon, reading his expression with uncanny accuracy. "I'm not spiraling. You've checked your rifle 3 times in the last hour. That's spiraling. Just being prepared. For what? An ambush by mountain lions? We haven't seen another human in 2 days." She was right, but that didn't ease the knot in his stomach. Everything depended on that box being exactly where he'd left it, undisturbed and intact. If it wasn't... "We're almost there," he said, partly to himself. "Another few hours?" The ranch came into view just as the sun touched the western peaks, golden light spilling across the valley Ethan had claimed as his own. The cabin looked exactly as he'd left it, small and sturdy, built from lodgepole pine with a sod roof that blended into the landscape. The barn stood nearby, corral empty of the cattle he'd turned loose before leaving. Everything peaceful and untouched, preserved like a photograph of a life he'd walked away from. "It's beautiful," Lydia said softly. "It's small." Small isn't the same as not beautiful. They rode up to the cabin, and Ethan's trained eye cataloged details. Door still locked, windows intact, no signs of intrusion or disturbance. So far, so good. He dismounted, helped Lydia down, though she didn't need the assistance, and approached the cabin with keys that hadn't left his possession. The lock clicked open. The door swung inward on hinges that needed oil. Inside, everything was exactly as he'd left it. Spartan furnishings, table, chairs, a bed in the loft above, shelves with supplies, the potbelly stove cold and waiting, and in the corner, the floorboards that hid his carefully buried future. Ethan knelt, pried up the boards with a knife, reached into the cavity beneath. His fingers found metal, the strong box, right where it was supposed to be. He pulled it out, hands shaking slightly with relief and adrenaline. Set it on the table. The lock opened to a key he wore around his neck. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were banknotes and bonds and gold coins. His entire savings. 10 years of careful accumulation. Security against uncertain futures. He looked up to find Lydia standing in the doorway, silhouetted against sunset, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "It's here," he said unnecessarily. "I can see that. 1,500 for your mortgage. You'll have it paid before end of May." Lydia stepped inside, moved to the table, looked down at the contents of the box. "Ethan, this is everything you have. It's what you need. What happens to you after you give this away? How do you survive? Expand your herd, handle emergencies?" "I'll manage, always have." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I've got." She reached out, touched the money like it might burn her. "I can't accept this. I thought I could, but now that I'm standing here looking at your entire life savings, I can't." "Lydia, no, listen to me." She turned to face him fully. "You've already given up your isolation, risked your life, made enemies of the most powerful family in the valley. I won't let you bankrupt yourself too. It's my money, my choice. And it's my debt, my responsibility." Her voice strengthened with conviction. "We'll find another way. I'll sell the property to someone other than Garrett, move somewhere else, start fresh. You'll lose your father's school. Better than destroying your future." They stood facing each other across the table, the strong box between them like a physical manifestation of everything they were fighting over. Outside, night was falling fast, stars beginning to emerge. "What if there's a third option?" Ethan said slowly. "What third option?" He wasn't sure where the idea came from, whether it had been building for days or arrived fully formed in that moment. But suddenly it was there, clear and obvious and terrifying in its implications. "What if you didn't have to pay it back?" he said. "What if this wasn't a loan but an investment?" "Investment in what?" "In us. Together. Partners." Lydia went very still. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we stop pretending this is just about your mortgage, or my redemption, or any single thing." Ethan took a breath, committed to the leap. "I'm proposing we admit that somewhere in the past week, this became about more than saving your school. That maybe we could build something together that works better than either of us alone." "Ethan," her voice was barely a whisper, "are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking you to consider it. Not as rescue or desperation or convenience, but as partnership. Two people who've both been alone too long, both carrying damage, both trying to build something worth having." He met her eyes. "I pay your mortgage. You keep your school. We figure out the rest as we go." "That's insane." "Most worthwhile things are. You said that yourself." "I was talking about riding north for money, not marriage to a man I've known for a week." "You know me well enough. You've seen me scared and determined and willing to fight. You've shared danger and coffee and campfires. That's more truth than most couples get before they stand in front of a preacher." Lydia turned away, pacing to the window, staring out at darkness and her own reflection. Ethan waited, barely breathing, aware he'd just gambled everything on a proposal that made no logical sense but felt more right than anything had in years. Finally, she spoke. "If I say yes, and I'm not saying I am, but if I did, what would that look like? You here, me in Pine Hollow, visiting when convenient? I was thinking we both go back, run the school together. I sell this place, combine our resources, build something bigger than either of us alone. You'd give up your ranch, your isolation?" "Already gave up isolation when I stayed in Pine Hollow. The ranch is just property. What matters is building something that lasts." She turned back to face him, and in the dimness he could see tears tracking down her cheeks. "You're serious. You're actually serious about this." "Completely. Why? Why me? Why now? Because you're brave and stubborn and you fight for what matters. Because I've spent 10 years running from connection and I'm tired of running. Because when I think about futures, the only one that doesn't feel empty has you in it. Lydia crossed the small space between them, stood close enough that he could see gold flecks in her brown eyes, close enough to feel her breath on his face. "This is crazy," she whispered. "I know. We barely know each other. We know enough. It might not work. It might. That's better odds than either of us has alone." She reached up, touched his face with trembling fingers. "If I say yes, it has to be real. Not convenience or desperation. Real partnership, equal voices, shared decisions. I wouldn't want it any other way. And you understand I'm difficult and opinionated and completely incapable of being a traditional wife? I'm counting on it." Lydia laughed through tears. "Then yes. God help us both, but yes." Ethan kissed her then. Gentle and careful and full of promise, neither could guarantee, but both were willing to risk everything to try. Outside, stars wheeled overhead in ancient patterns. Inside a tiny cabin in the Wyoming wilderness, two damaged people chose hope over safety and partnership over isolation. And somewhere south in Pine Hollow, Samuel Garrett's plans were about to meet an obstacle he hadn't anticipated. Not just determination, not just stubbornness, love. Unexpected, inconvenient, and absolutely unwilling to surrender. They spent that night in the cabin talking until the fire burned low and then reigniting it to talk some more. Two people who'd committed to an impossible future trying to map out what that might actually mean. Lydia sat curled in the single chair while Ethan leaned against the table, and they spoke of practical things because the emotional reality was too large to fully grasp yet. "We'll need to move quickly," Lydia said as dawn began to gray the eastern windows. "Get back to Pine Hollow. Pay the mortgage before Garrett realizes we have the money. 3 days hard riding, maybe 2.5 if we push." Ethan was already running calculations. "That puts us back with almost 2 weeks to spare before the deadline. Plenty of time for Garrett to cause trouble. He'll cause trouble regardless. At least this way, the property's legally yours when he does." Lydia stood, moved to the window, watched the sun paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold. What happens after? After the mortgage is paid and we're married and we're trying to run a school while Samuel Garrett plots our destruction? We survive. Build, fight when we have to, and live when we can. You make it sound simple. It won't be simple, but it might be worth it. She turned back to him, morning light catching in her dark hair, making her look younger and more vulnerable than the fierce teacher who'd faced down drunk bullies. "I'm scared, Ethan. Terrified, actually. Not of Garrett or losing the school, but of this. Of us. Of wanting something this much when I've spent years learning not to want anything I couldn't provide for myself." He crossed to her, took her hands in his. "I'm scared too. Haven't wanted anything except isolation for a decade. Now I'm proposing marriage and partnership and all the things that terrify me most. We're both fools, probably. But we're fools together, which seems like an improvement." Lydia laughed, that sharp, bright sound he was beginning to recognize as her defense against overwhelming emotion. "My father used to say the best decisions felt like jumping off cliffs, terrifying right up until you discovered you could fly. Your father was an optimist." "He was, and he died broke and exhausted, but he also died knowing he'd made a difference. That has to count for something." They packed quickly, loading Ethan's strongbox onto Buck, along with supplies for the journey south. Ethan took a final look around the cabin, this space that had been his sanctuary and his prison for 6 years. He'd built a life here, small, solitary, safe. Now he was trading it for something larger and more dangerous and infinitely more complicated. No regrets, he told himself. Not yet, anyway. The ride back south was faster than the journey north had been, both of them eager to reach Pine Hollow before Garrett could move against the property in their absence. They covered nearly 30 miles the first day, made camp in a sheltered canyon, and lay under stars talking about everything and nothing. Lydia told stories about her students, the boy who couldn't spell but could calculate complex mathematics in his head, the Mexican girl whose family spoke no English but who was learning 3 languages simultaneously. Ethan talked about his cattle, the rhythms of ranch life, the satisfaction of building something from raw land and stubborn determination. They were learning each other, Lydia realized. Not the dramatic revelations of crisis, but the small mundane details that actually built a life together. His preference for coffee so strong it could strip paint. Her habit of humming while she worked. The way he checked weapons with automatic precision bred from military training. The way she organized everything, supplies, thoughts, plans, into neat categories that made sense only to her. "You're very orderly," Ethan observed on the second evening. "Chaos terrifies me. Always has. When my mother died, I was 12, and suddenly everything was uncertain. My father tried his best, but he was a teacher, not a parent. Didn't know how to braid hair or make proper meals or any of the things mothers do. So I learned to create order wherever I could. Made lists, established routines, organized everything I could control because so much was beyond control. And now you're marrying a man you've known for a week and riding toward a confrontation with the most powerful family in the valley. That seem orderly to you?" "Not even slightly, but maybe that's growth, learning to embrace chaos when the alternative is losing everything that matters." The third day brought them within sight of Pine Hollow as the sun reached its zenith. The town looked exactly as they'd left it, peaceful and ordinary, and completely unaware of the drama about to unfold. They rode straight to the bank, Ethan carrying the strongbox, Lydia walking beside him with her head high and her shoulders back despite the exhaustion of 3 days hard riding. The bank manager, a thin, nervous man named Perkins who probably reported directly to William Garrett, looked up from his ledger with poorly concealed surprise. "Miss Moore, Mr. Cole, I wasn't expecting you." "I'm here to pay my mortgage in full," Lydia said without preamble. Perkins blinked. "I'm sorry?" "My mortgage. The one due at the end of May. I'm paying it now, $1,500. She gestured to Ethan, who set the strongbox on the counter with a solid thunk. "Miss Moore, I don't think you understand the situation. The Garrett family has already made arrangements to purchase your property when the mortgage comes due. The mortgage isn't due yet. I have 2 weeks, and I'm exercising my right to pay in full before that deadline." Lydia's voice carried steel underneath the politeness. "Unless you're refusing to accept legal payment, in which case I'll need that refusal in writing for my attorney." Perkins went pale. "You don't have an attorney." "I will by the end of the day. Now, are you accepting this payment or not?" The manager's eyes darted between Lydia and Ethan, clearly calculating how much trouble he'd face from the Garretts versus how much legal liability he'd incur by refusing legitimate payment. Legal liability won, barely. "I'll need to count it," he said finally. "Count away." It took 20 minutes for Perkins to verify the amount, prepare the paperwork, and officially mark the mortgage as paid in full. Lydia signed documents with a flourish, took her copies, and turned to leave with the satisfied expression of someone who'd just won a significant battle. They were halfway to the door when Perkins spoke up, his voice thin and worried. "Miss Moore, the Garretts aren't going to be happy about this." "I don't imagine they will be," Lydia agreed. But that's their problem, not mine." Outside, the spring sunshine felt warmer, brighter, like the world itself was celebrating their victory. Lydia actually laughed, giddy with relief and accomplishment and the sheer audacity of what they'd just done. "We did it," she said. "We actually did it." "First part's done," Ethan cautioned. "Now comes the hard part." "What's harder than riding 6 days round trip and gambling everything on a box of money?" "Surviving whatever Garrett does when he finds out." Lydia sobered. "You're right. We should get back to the property. Make sure it's still standing." The Moore place looked untouched when they arrived. No signs of vandalism or arson, no threatening messages left behind. But Ethan noticed boot prints near the tree line that hadn't been there before. Someone had been watching, waiting for their return. They'd barely unsaddled the horses when Sheriff Bradshaw rode up, his expression grim. "Heard you two were back in town. Heard you paid off the mortgage, too." "News travels fast," Lydia said. "In Pine Hollow, everything travels fast." Bradshaw dismounted, moving like a man delivering bad news he didn't want to share. "Samuel Garrett knows. He's not pleased." "Didn't expect him to be," Ethan said. "You don't understand. He's called in men from his other properties, got maybe 20 guns now, all loyal to him, all waiting for the word to move. Bradshaw's eyes were troubled. He's planning something big, something final, and I don't have the authority or the manpower to stop him. What are you suggesting we do? Leave. Tonight. Both of you. Take what you can carry and ride out before Garrett decides to make an example. Lydia stepped forward. Sheriff, I just paid $1,500 to keep this property. I'm not abandoning it because Samuel Garrett is having a tantrum. This isn't a tantrum, Miss Moore. This is a man who's built his entire reputation on getting what he wants. You just embarrassed him in front of the whole town. He'll respond, and when he does, people will die. Then arrest him. You're the law. Bradshaw's laugh was bitter. I'm a badge and a title in a town owned by the Garrett family. The real law is whatever they say it is. Ethan had been scanning the property while Bradshaw talked, his military training cataloging defensive positions and vulnerabilities. The house was solid, but not a fortress. The cottonwoods provided some cover, but not enough. If Garrett came with 20 men, this would be a slaughter. What if we didn't run? He said slowly. What if we made it cost more than Garrett's willing to pay? Both Lydia and Bradshaw turned to stare at him. You can't seriously be considering fighting 20 men, Bradshaw said. Not fighting, negotiating from strength. What strength? You're two people with rifles against an army. We're two people who've already beaten him once, who embarrassed him by paying the mortgage he thought he'd already won, who've shown the whole town that Samuel Garrett doesn't always get what he wants. Ethan met the sheriff's eyes. That's worth something. That's leverage. Leverage for what? For making him realize that destroying us costs more than it's worth. Not in money, in reputation. In the example it sets for every other person in this valley who might consider standing up to him. Lydia was looking at him with something between admiration and disbelief. You want to bluff. I want to make him think twice before starting a war he might not win cleanly. He'll still come, Bradshaw warned. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And when he does, we'll be ready. Ethan's voice carried conviction he didn't entirely feel, but needed to project. And we'll make damn sure everyone in Pine Hollow sees what happens. Sees whether Samuel Garrett is the kind of man who burns down schools and murders teachers, or whether he backs down when the cost gets too high. Bradshaw studied him for a long moment, then slowly shook his head. You're either the bravest man I've ever met, or the most foolish. Probably both. The sheriff mounted his horse, paused before riding out. For what it's worth, I hope you survive this. Pine Hollow could use more people willing to stand up instead of bending down. After Bradshaw left, Lydia turned to Ethan. Do you actually have a plan, or was that all bravado? Mostly bravado, but I'm working on the plan. Work faster, because if Garrett comes tonight, he won't come tonight. He'll wait, build anticipation, make us sweat. Men like him enjoy the fear as much as the victory. You sound very certain. I've known men like Samuel Garrett. They're predictable in their cruelty. They spent the rest of the day fortifying what they could. Moved the horses to a corral with clear escape routes. Positioned water barrels near the house in case of fire. Cleaned and loaded every weapon they owned. Ethan even climbed onto the roof, looking for weak points and finding too many. As evening fell, they sat on the porch, the same spot where they'd taken watch together what felt like years ago, but had only been days. The similarity wasn't lost on either of them. If this goes badly, Lydia said quietly, I want you to know I don't regret it. Any of it. Not staying to fight, not riding north for the money, not saying yes to your insane proposal. It's not going badly. But if it does, it won't. Ethan took her hand, laced their fingers together. We didn't come this far to lose now. That's not how the world works. Good people lose all the time. Not this time. He wished he felt as confident as he sounded. They took turns sleeping, 2 hours on and 2 hours off, maintaining vigilance through the long night. No attack came, just silence and darkness and the weight of waiting. Dawn arrived gray and cool, bringing with it a rider carrying a white flag. Ethan recognized him as one of William Garrett's men from that first confrontation at the store. The man stopped at the property line, holding the flag high. Mr. Cole! Miss Moore! Mr. William Garrett requests a parley. Just him and my brother Samuel. No weapons, no tricks. They want to talk terms. Lydia appeared beside Ethan, her rifle held casual but ready. What terms? That's between you and them. But they're coming at noon, just the two of them. They're asking you receive them peacefully. And if we refuse? The messenger shrugged. Then I guess talking's over and other methods begin. But Mr. William thought you might prefer talking. After the messenger left, Lydia turned to Ethan. It's a trap. Probably. So we refuse. Or we hear what they have to say. Sometimes the enemy tells you their plans when they think they've already won. Noon came with painful slowness. Ethan and Lydia waited on the porch, both armed despite the promise of peaceful parley, both scanning the tree line for hidden gunmen. The Garrett brothers arrived exactly on time, riding fine horses and wearing expressions of calm confidence. They stopped at the property line, technically respectful of boundaries, but making clear who held real power. Samuel Garrett spoke first. Congratulations on paying your mortgage, Miss Moore. That was unexpected. Was it? I told you repeatedly I wouldn't sell. People say many things, few follow through. Samuel's eyes shifted to Ethan. I underestimated you, Mr. Cole. Thought you were just a drifter playing hero. Didn't realize you had resources. People contain surprises. Indeed they do. William Garrett dismounted, moved closer with the easy confidence of a man certain of his safety. Which brings us to why we're here. You've won this round. The property is legally yours, the mortgage paid. We acknowledge that. How generous, Lydia said dryly. But, William continued, we also recognize this situation has become untenable for everyone involved. You're living under constant threat. We're dealing with a public embarrassment. The town is watching to see how this resolves. Nobody's winning. Sounds like a personal problem, Ethan observed. Samuel's face darkened, but William held up a hand. My brother wants to burn you out, wants to make an example so brutal nobody ever challenges us again. But I'm a businessman, and I see costs where he sees satisfaction, so I'm here with a final offer. We're not selling, Lydia said. Not the property. We're offering peace. You keep your school, run it however you want, and we leave you alone, completely. No more threats, no more intimidation, no more attempts to force you out. In exchange for what? In exchange for you leaving the valley politics alone. Don't encourage other ranchers to stand against us. Don't write letters to newspapers about our business practices. Don't make us look weak by publicizing what happened here. William's smile was cold. Basically, you win your small victory, and we maintain our larger authority. Everyone gets something. Lydia looked at Ethan, a silent question in her eyes. He could see her wrestling with it, the temptation of peace versus the cost of silence. If they accepted, her school survived, but Garrett's control remained absolute. If they refused, they faced ongoing violence with no guarantee of survival. No, Ethan said quietly. William's eyebrows rose. No? We're not agreeing to silence. You want peace? Fine. Leave us alone and we'll leave you alone. But we don't promise to stay quiet if you abuse other people the way you tried to abuse Miss Moore. That's not acceptable. Then I guess talking's over. Samuel leaned forward in his saddle. You're making a mistake, Cole. A fatal one. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. The brothers exchanged glances, some wordless communication passing between them. Then William shrugged. We tried reasonable. Remember that when what comes next begin. Oh, he remounted. You have until sundown to reconsider. After that, all offers are withdrawn. They rode away at a walk, unhurried and confident. Lydia waited until they disappeared before speaking. They're going to attack tonight. Probably. We can't hold this property against 20 men. No, but we can make it cost enough that other people notice. Other people like who? Ethan was already moving, heading for the stable. Like every rancher in the valley who's been squeezed by Garrett. Like every merchant who's had to pay protection money. Like everyone who's been waiting for someone else to stand up first. You think they'll help us? I think if we make enough noise, some of them might. And even if they don't, at least Garrett's actions will be public, visible. Harder to pretend he's just a legitimate businessman if he's burning schools in front of witnesses. They spent the afternoon spreading the word. Ethan rode to 3 neighboring ranches, small operations that Garrett hadn't yet absorbed. and told them what was coming. Told them this was their chance to either stand together or watch another independent operation get destroyed. Lydia went to town, spoke to families whose children attended her school, made clear that the school's survival was at stake. Some promised to help. Most promised to watch. A few promised nothing but didn't turn them away. By sunset, they had maybe 6 additional men willing to stand with them. Not an army, but better than 2 alone. Ethan positioned them carefully. 2 in the barn with clear sightlines to the house. 2 in the cottonwoods. 2 in the house with Lydia and himself. Everyone armed, everyone understanding this might end badly. If shooting starts, Ethan told them, aim to wound, not kill. We want witnesses who can testify about what happened, not bodies that make us look like murderers. Night fell. They waited. The attack came at midnight, exactly when Ethan expected it. Torches appeared at the tree line, 20 men, maybe more, moving in organized formation. Not a mob, but a military operation. Someone had been planning this carefully. Ethan stepped onto the porch, rifle ready, but not raised. Beside him, Lydia stood tall and defiant. Samuel Garrett rode forward, torch in hand. Last chance, Cole. You and the schoolteacher ride out now. We let you leave alive. Property's not yours to offer safe passage from, Ethan called back. It will be when I burn it to the ground. Then you'll do it in front of 30 witnesses who'll testify you committed arson and attempted murder. Garrett laughed. Garrett, what witnesses? I see 2 people about to die and some cowards hiding in the dark. Look closer. Lights bloomed across the valley. Lanterns, torches. The ranchers and merchants and families who'd promised to watch were watching, making themselves visible, bearing witness. Not fighting, but not hiding either. Garrett's expression shifted, uncertainty flickering across his face. You burn this property, Ethan said, his voice carrying in the night silence, and everyone in Pine Hollow sees Samuel Garrett destroy a school because a woman refused to surrender to intimidation. That the legacy you want? That the story you want told about you? Nobody will care. I think they will. I think you've pushed people around so long you've forgotten they're capable of pushing back. Maybe not today. Maybe not this fight. But eventually. Ethan lowered his rifle deliberately. Or you can ride away. Right now. Leave us in peace. And tomorrow everyone talks about how Samuel Garrett showed restraint when he could have chosen violence. That seems like a better story. The silence stretched. Ethan could see Garrett calculating, weighing reputation against satisfaction, long-term authority against short-term revenge. Finally, William Garrett rode up beside his brother. Samuel. He's right. Burning a school makes us look like monsters. Walking away makes us look strong enough to choose mercy. They humiliated us. They paid a debt. That's not humiliation. That's business. William's voice carried certainty. We walk away tonight. We maintain moral authority. We attack. We lose it forever. Samuel stared at the house, at Ethan and Lydia standing defiant on the porch, at the witnesses scattered across the valley, watching and waiting. His hand tightened on the torch until Ethan thought he might throw it anyway, consequences be damned. Then Samuel hurled the torch into the dirt, where it sputtered and died. This isn't over, he snarled. Yes, it is, William said quietly. It's over because continuing it costs more than we're willing to pay. He turned his horse. Let's go. They rode out, all 20 men, disappearing into darkness like a nightmare receding with dawn. Ethan felt Lydia's hand find his, trembling with relief and residual fear and triumph, all tangled together. Did we just win? She whispered. We survived. That's close enough. The witnesses began dispersing, melting back into the night, their purpose served. But several rode up to the house first, the neighboring ranchers who'd positioned themselves to help if needed. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the stupidest, one of them said, a grizzled cattleman named Henderson. But either way, it worked. Garrett backed down. First time I've seen that in a decade. He'll remember, another warned. Might come back at you sideways. Let him try, Lydia said, steel in her voice. I'm not going anywhere. After everyone left, Ethan and Lydia stood on the porch, watching the last torches disappear toward town. The crisis had passed. They'd survived. The property was safe, at least for now. "What happens tomorrow?" Lydia asked. "Tomorrow you teach. I figure out what needs fixing around here. We start building a life instead of just defending one. Together. Together." They were married 3 days later in a quiet ceremony at the church, with Sheriff Bradshaw standing witness and half of Lydia's students in attendance. The pastor, clearly uncomfortable but unable to refuse in front of so many community members, performed the service quickly and without commentary. Ethan Cole and Lydia Moore became Ethan and Lydia Cole, partners in property and purpose, and the 1,000 small negotiations that made up a shared life. The weeks that followed brought changes. Ethan sold his northern ranch to a young homesteader for enough to replenish their reserves and fund improvements to the Moore property. He built a new barn, expanded the corral, and proved surprisingly adept at repairing the small damages that accumulated in any working school. Lydia continued teaching, her enrollment slowly rebuilding as families recognized the Garretts had truly backed down. She added advanced courses, started a lending library, and began training older students to help teach younger ones, expanding her father's vision of free education for all. Samuel Garrett kept his distance, though his resentment was palpable whenever their paths crossed in town. William Garrett actually tipped his hat once, a gesture of respect for worthy opponents. The valley slowly adjusted to its new reality, that the Garretts' power wasn't absolute, that standing together could sometimes prevail against standing authority. 6 months after the confrontation, on a cool October morning, Lydia stood in front of her expanded school watching children stream in for the day's lessons. Ethan was repairing the fence near the road, working with the steady competence he brought to every practical task. She felt his presence before he spoke, turning to find him standing close, smelling of sawdust and leather, and the particular combination of scents she'd come to associate with home. "Students are looking good," he observed. "You've got what? 18 now?" 22. The Hernandez family is sending their youngest next week. "Your father would be proud." "I think he would." Lydia leaned into Ethan's solid warmth. "Proud that the school survived. Proud that we found a way." "Found each other, you mean?" "That too." They stood together watching the sun climb higher, burning off morning mist, revealing a world that had shifted subtly but definitely. Not perfect. Samuel Garrett still owned most of the valley, still wielded enormous power, but not unlimited power, not unchallenged authority. And in a schoolhouse on the edge of Pine Hollow, children were learning that standing up for what mattered was possible, that bullies could be faced down, that two people willing to fight for each other could sometimes build something beautiful from stubborn determination and impossible odds. "I love you," Lydia said suddenly, surprising herself with the word's simplicity. Ethan smiled, that rare, genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. "I know, you married me after all." "I married you for the money. You married me because you're terrible at making practical decisions," says the man who threatened to burn down a ranch to protect a stranger. "Best impractical decision I ever made," Lydia laughed, rising on her toes to kiss him, brief and sweet and full of promise for all the ordinary, extraordinary days ahead. Then she turned back toward her students, toward the future they were building together, one lesson at a time. Ethan Cole had ridden into Pine Hollow planning to stay one night and leave before trouble found him. Instead, he'd found purpose, partnership, and proof that the best things in life came not from safety, but from risk taken for the right reasons. He'd ridden in alone. He'd ride out. When that day came, with a wife beside him, a school full of students calling his name, and a life rooted not in isolation, but in the messy, complicated, absolutely worthwhile business of belonging. The stranger who meant to leave had found his home after all, not in property or possessions, but in the fierce loyalty of a woman who taught him that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to stand anyway. And on a frontier where survival often meant taking what you could and running, they'd chosen instead to stay, to build, to fight for something larger than themselves. That choice made all the difference.